Our story kicks off with a man, profusely bleeding and struggling to catch his breath. He reflected on just how far they had come. Laser beams continuously rained down upon them. He desperately clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could still defeat the enemy. But in a horrifying instant, something pierced him directly in the chest. He froze, needing a moment to grasp the reality of it. There was now a gaping hole straight through his chest. He staggered and dropped heavily to his knees. That's when it truly registered. This was a devastating, deadly blow. He collapsed, face first, onto the cold ground. Then, a sobering thought struck him about how he'd ultimately die, completely powerless to change his fate. His blurry, fading eyes stared blankly straight ahead. He was looking at the colossal, flying humanoid creature, mankind's greatest enemy, aptly named the Liquidator. This enigmatic being had suddenly appeared one day and effortlessly annihilated an entire continent. In this grim world, a special elite group was formed, dedicated to defending humanity against these monstrous threats. The very first member introduced was a man, renowned for surviving a massive meteor strike, completely unscathed, wielding nothing but a shield. Truly astonishing. And because of that incredible feat, people universally hailed him as the world's protecting shield. That's Brian Miller. Then there was also the Great Sage, whose power was said to rival an entire military division. She is the Great Sage, Bella Albright. In addition to them, we have an archer, who famously took down a high-level dragon in a single, precise shot. His name is Jacob Bloomfield, the divine archer. And of course, there's the strongest swordsman to ever grace this world with their presence, the sword saint, Amy White. And then there was them, a group officially designated as the support unit. Corpses were already tragically scattered all over the area. The man on the absolute brink of death, RMC, was merely a foot soldier, Gray Lee. He believed they were nothing more than sacrificial pawns. He watched those elite groups fight, thinking about how truly on another level they were. He knew the graduates of the World Union Academy were amazing, but he simply hadn't expected the sheer magnitude of the gap between their abilities and his. It was unbelievably wide. The elites unleashed a barrage of attacks on the Liquidator. It hit him hard. He questioned if their efforts even mattered, with or without the support unit. Amy continued her fierce battle with the Liquidator, attempting to stab him with lightning-fast movements. Gray gritted his teeth, witnessing the overwhelming power gap, even after all their intense training. It was agonizing, bringing tears to his eyes. The Liquidator masterfully dodged the blades, until one blade finally grazed him. He was genuinely impressed that Amy managed to injure him, so he got serious, unleashing a lightning-fast strike, and skillfully cut an elite's body in half. They fell, blood gushing from their bodies. Gray's eyes widened in shock. The Liquidator had unleashed his true skill, now that he was done playing around. Gray couldn't believe he took them down. In a single blow, he realized he had been just playing. Until then, it pained him to admit there was no way they could win. He lay there in a pool of his own blood, but he was still conscious. Time had passed since his heart was pierced, so it was a puzzle to him why he was still alive. As his blood dripped, someone spoke weakly. "I finally found you." The drop of blood transformed into a small light, and eventually it became a message. Gray was called to come forth, for he wields great power. He woke up, surprised as he looked at his surroundings. It was a dark place with several stone structures, so he asked where he was. It made him think it was the afterlife, though it was quite barren aside from that. He also noticed someone sitting on a throne. This person gave the impression of a god, with their black clothing, horns, and a veil that covered their forehead, and a golden mark on their chest. It had a calm, stoic face. The mysterious creature spoke to him, saying that he had not perished, and informed him that his physical wounds had already been healed. Then Gray had something in mind. His injured body was shown on a screen. He asked if he had healed him. He clarified it wasn't his doing, but Gray's own power was responsible, leaving Gray completely perplexed. The enigmatic creature couldn't explain it to him, as he himself couldn't fully analyze Gray's true power, but he guaranteed that Gray's power is far stronger than the liquidators, but only if he could properly control it. Gray then asked him if it meant they could win the battle. He confessed he had no idea and advised against having high hopes. And yet still, he also strongly believed they needed to eliminate the liquidator, which is why he rose and pierced Gray's chest, imbuing him with power. Then a brilliant blue light erupted. A mystic circle materialized on Gray's chest. The voice declared it would lend Gray its power. Soon after, Gray awoke, lying on a bloodied corpse. He quickly seized his sword. The sword's tip glowed with dark energy. He was told this was his very own power. The enigmatic creature informed him that his true power was not visible to the naked eye. Gray understood. The liquidator then spotted him. Without hesitation, Gray unleashed a slash at the liquidator. The liquidator caught a glimpse of his face. It couldn't believe such a powerful person still remained. Its chest bore a shallow scratch. Gray realized his attack had indeed done some damage. He charged again, brimming with confidence, declaring his power was superior. But the liquidator warned him not to underestimate it. The next thing Gray knew, he was utterly shocked. It took him a moment to process what had just occurred. His body was sliced in half, only his lower half remained, and blood gushed from it like a horrifying fountain. The liquidator commended him for pushing it to use its full power. Then, unexpectedly, a black mist shrouded the area, and a hooded figure materialized. A sinister mask obscured his face. His body seemed akin to a swirling black flame. He menacingly raised his colossal black sword. The liquidator looked on, utterly confused. It immediately conjured a barrier around itself. The black flame was then extinguished, manifesting on the left side of his face. And from that point, Gray's identity is already clear. The liquidator demands, "Are you truly human?" Gray glares back, then instantly attacks. His sword violently meets the barrier. He strains, desperately trying to break through. The liquidator's eyes widen as he notices something. His barrier shatters completely, and the sword slashes him. He demands once more, "Are you truly human?" Gray's eerie reply, "I was wondering the same thing." Then, with calculated menace, he takes a step. Gray admits the liquidator's strength is certainly no joke. He was shocked he was still alive and breathing. He gasps, his breathing now heavy and strained. The liquidator takes a menacing step closer and whispers his grim vow, "I will crush you," over and over until he draws his last breath. But Gray, quick as lightning, launches his attack first. The liquidator is gashed, his vivid yellow blood splattering. "You monster," he gasps. But defeat isn't an option for the liquidator. Then, a brilliant light envelopes its body. As it rapidly builds up even more power, he clasps his hands, and a vast magic circle appears. He proclaims triumphantly, "Your time is up." Our MC clenches his grip on his massive, intimidating sword, as he intently waits for the liquidator's next move. Gray is taken aback by how suddenly it turned to night, but Gray remains completely unfazed. He instantly appears behind him, intent on slicing his neck. But his sword is abruptly halted by the barrier. Gray is surprised as the liquidator calmly states, "It's futile, for in this domain, the plane of true dusk, nothing is capable of harming me. So then, you would do well to cease this futile resistance, and cast your gaze upon the stars." Gray's eyes widen as the star reflects in them. It expands, shining with blinding intensity in his eyes. The liquidator proclaims, "It is beautiful, isn't it? Like a miniature sun, it suddenly plummets from the sky. The impact is undeniably devastating. The impact of the shooting star blasts a crater in the ground, and our MC is nowhere to be found." The liquidator assumes Gray won't be able to revive if Gray's been completely pulverized to dust. But he's utterly shocked when a portal begins to form, eventually becoming a massive magic circle. Then, an unknown voice speaks, acknowledging the immense power that has been gathered. He thought that would be enough to send him back. The liquidator recognized him. It was Kronos. Kronos then asked the one who wields great power, "Can you hear me?" Having used all his strength, he decided to send him back to the past. The liquidator furiously cursed at Kronos. Kronos told Gray that this was all he could do. The magic clock began ticking. It counted backward, and when it hit 1, he told him he was entrusting the fate of the world to him. With that, Gray suddenly woke from his nap, lying peacefully on the grass. He felt confused, wondering where he was. He had woken up in the middle of a field. The sky was bright and the grass was vibrant green. He then looked to his right and recognized it instantly, his hometown, Renato Village. He was utterly puzzled. It shouldn't even exist. It had been destroyed 15 years ago. Then he suddenly recalled being advised to be sent back to the past. He couldn't fathom that it had actually happened. He propped himself up on one hand, but saw the old wound from that time. He remembered being picked on by Belder and his crew. This time, he vowed not to be beaten by guys like them. But he knew those guys were tough, and he simply couldn't beat them yet. He sighed, stating that defeating the Liquidator was just a dream. He decided to strategize on how to deal with them once he was a bit stronger, because he definitely didn't want to get hurt. But while walking through the forest, he unfortunately ran straight into them. The leader, the biggest bully of them all, named Belder, the absolute jerk, was with 3 young men. Belder told Gray he'd been searching for him, and it had been a real pain to find him. Gray was cautious. Belder then threw a sword in front of him, telling him to pick it up. Gray looked clueless, which made Belder call him out for acting dumb. He wanted a mock battle. Gray refused, saying his injury hadn't healed yet. He thanked him for the invitation, but told him he couldn't partake until his injury fully healed. Belder replied, assuring him there was nothing to worry about, since the blade was blunt. Gray reasoned that no matter how blunt the blade was, it was still a lump of iron, and could still injure someone, if in the wrong place. Belder roared at him to shut his damn mouth. He told Gray he had no right to say no, and if he didn't like swords, he could just fight without a weapon. Belder immediately charged forward. Gray was caught completely off guard. He couldn't believe Belder wanted to beat him, even while he was unarmed. Now, it didn't seem like this was truly meant to be a mock battle at all. He remembered what the military doctor had told him. Before he was sent back, the doctor said the reason his swordsmanship wasn't improving was due to an injury he'd sustained as a child. And reflecting on it now, he could tell that's where his life as a loser truly began. He sidestepped, deftly evading Belder's attack. But then, something confused him. Belder clicked his tongue in annoyance, while Gray wondered if Belder strikes were always that slow. He ducked to avoid another attack. They engaged in a dance-like motion, wherein Belder attacked, and he evaded. He realized it wasn't because Belder was slow. Belder grew annoyed that he couldn't land a hit. The sword was an inch away from Gray's face, but he moved swiftly to evade, closing the gap between them. He realized the correct answer was he had gotten faster. The other 3 young men were stunned by his move. They stated that he seemed like a completely different person. He went to pick up the sword. He knew he might not have the body that he used to have, but he had the memories of the battles he'd fought. Belder leapt to slash him. Even with the attack coming from behind, he skillfully deflected it by swinging the sword, using his uninjured hand. Belder was hit, letting out a small groan. Gray was completely caught off guard. It was enough to throw him completely off balance. It made him truly question if it was even fair to fight such an amateur. But he quickly reminded himself that this guy didn't deserve an ounce of pity. He reasoned that these were the very same punks who had tormented him mercilessly when he couldn't fight back. But this time, things were completely different. He launched an attack, forcing Belder to drop his sword. Belder let out a loud curse. Seeing how easily he dropped his weapon, Gray could tell Belder was even worse than an amateur. He taunted that Belder probably wasn't trained on how to even properly take a sword blow. Our main character then stepped in front of Belder. He assured him there was absolutely nothing to worry about, all while brandishing his own sword. He quoted that as long as the blade has been dulled, it will be totally safe to beat someone with it. Belder took a direct hit. He couldn't believe his shoulder was actually bleeding when blood splattered across his face. He cried out and collapsed to his knees. Gray was shocked the blade wasn't blunted after all, but upon checking, it was completely blunt. Had it been a sharp sword, Belder might have actually been killed. He glared fiercely at them and continued to strike. Belder was struck hard on the nose. He bled profusely as he crumpled onto his back. Gray decided to keep utilizing the blunt edge. He loomed menacingly over Belder and asked why he was screaming so much. He had no right to do so, especially since he was the one who said a blunt. Sword was safe. He then grinned devilishly at him. Belder's fear began to mount. He screamed at the three young men to stop standing around and beat Gray's ass. Those three were terrified because Gray had suddenly gotten so strong. All of a sudden, one of them suggested they rush him together. From behind, they surrounded him. Gray asked them if they wanted another round. Belder, in a fit of rage, ordered the three to kill him. Gray stated he was originally going to overlook it, but he changed his mind. The forest was indeed disturbed. Those four ended up completely bruised and battered, with a large bump on each of their heads. They could barely pry their eyes open. They knelt meekly, their weight resting on their heels, hands gently on their laps. Gray recalled how he'd once been terrified of these guys. He then asked if they were from the serious swordsmanship dojo. Belder replied, something like that. One of them claimed they felt they'd gotten strong enough, so they hadn't been going lately. He thought to himself. He questioned their definition of strong enough. He realized he shouldn't expect much from the dojo itself, but regardless, he knew it would have its uses. He wanted an introduction to the dojo because it was referral only. Belder told him to ask someone else, because if he told his master he lost, he couldn't imagine what they'd say. Gray swung his sword in front of Belder and suggested that they should just continue what they were doing. Naturally, Belder freaked out. He ran off, yelling, "The dojo is that way." They were all amazed by his swiftness. The other three yelled at him not to leave them behind. They soon entered the city. Belder asked him why he wanted to join a dojo. He stated it was because the dojo has a recommendation slot for the academy. Belder confirmed he'd heard something like that. Gray responded that that was exactly why he wanted to go. One of the lackeys expressed that Gray was already strong enough without even going to the academy. Gray expressed that it would be nice if that were actually enough. But he knew that even the world's strongest lineup was no match for the liquidator. And even when he used Kronos' power, he couldn't even scratch him. When he got serious, he had no idea how strong he needed to be to defeat that thing. But still, he had some clues. Belder then pointed in the direction of the dojo, and he nodded. The moment he clashed with the liquidator, he felt it for a second. He'd mastered control over that dark power, and his focus in that moment was the swordsmanship the Sword Saint had taught him. He mused that if he'd spent more time honing his swordsmanship under the same harsh conditions as the Sword Saint, he knew then the battle's outcome might have been entirely different. He knew full well that this was precisely why Kronos had sent him there. They finally arrived at the dojo, where the woman heard them and tried to confirm. Did these bastards try to pick on a civilian, using the swordsmanship they learned from me? And finally, they just ended up getting their asses handed to them. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. This woman was the dojo's swordsmanship instructor, Soria Belder. Belder tried to argue they weren't picking on him, claiming it was just a mock battle. She responded by striking him so powerfully that he was blasted away, slamming into the wall. With a resounding wham, the other three's eyes widened in shock, and they trembled in palpable fear. She knew he was merely spouting empty excuses. She sternly told them, "If you call beating up an unarmed person a mock battle, then that means what I just did to you was also a mock battle, correct?" She pointed her sword directly at his eyes as she ordered him to leave and never return. She informed them they could no longer call themselves students of the dojo from that moment on. They all stammered yes and scurried away quickly. She then sat before Gray and offered an apology. She admitted that her former students had caused him a great deal of trouble. He replied there was no need to worry about it. She thanked him for his understanding and then smoothly shifted the topic to his desire for an academy recommendation. She reiterated her apologies for the trouble Belder and his cronies had caused, but as much as she wanted to help, she liked to write a letter of recommendation. She first had to confirm his abilities. With that, she handed him a wooden sword. Gray readily accepted. She generously offered him the first move, daring him to approach when he was ready. He wasted no time launching his attack. The dojo meticulously analyzed his every move. She noted his practical, no-nonsense swordsmanship. For his young age, she sensed something profound. It was as if he'd already fought countless battles. She lunged, and he deftly deflected her blow. She realized that Beldur and the others were no match for him. His fighting style seemed largely self-taught, yet every so often his swordplay mirrored techniques taught at the academy. This sparked her curiosity. Who had trained him? His swordsmanship was unrefined, she observed, but she conceded he possessed immense talent. And that's why she declared him a true diamond in the rough. It was nearly time to conclude their spar. She attacked, and he prepared to strike back. Their blades clashed violently again and again. She found it astounding that he wasn't faltering. Gray was easily keeping pace with her. She'd only intended a gentle test of his skills, but found herself pushed to her absolute limit. Then she recognized the unsettling feeling within her. It was fear. Gray was making her afraid. He swung his sword with such raw power. It forced her to recoil backward. Dismissing it as a wild, untrained swing, she seized the moment, spotting his weakness. She launched a decisive counterattack, determined to end their match right then. But she was utterly caught off guard, bewildered. Saria's sword lay shattered, cut clean in half. This astonishing feat left Gray utterly shocked too. He'd felt this exact sensation before, he realized, leading him to believe he still possessed the power. However, it came with a terrible drawback. Immense pain coursed through his entire body, forcing him to drop to his knees. Saria, filled with worry, asked what was wrong. He realized his body couldn't keep up with the power. His legs were visibly trembling. Yet he forced himself up, replying, "I'm okay." Barely able to stand, he made a mental note. Never use that power carelessly again. He considered telling Saria about his secret. Saria, on the other hand, he wondered why she was staring at him like that. He knew he shouldn't tell her, because even if he did, she probably wouldn't believe him anyway. So, he quickly decided to make an excuse, claiming he just got carried away. But deep inside, though, Saria knew it was impossible for a dull wooden sword to cut her blade, especially with just a dull wooden sword. And she was aware that he knew it too. Noticing her intense stare, he had to ask what was wrong. Saria clearly understood that. He had no intention of discussing what just happened. She paused, deep in thought. Then, she brought up the topic of what he wanted, a recommendation to the academy. He replied, saying he'd heard she could give him one. She confirmed, saying that she could indeed give him a recommendation to the kingdom's finest educational institution. That is, the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship. But then, she added she wouldn't recommend him going there, because she thought he wasn't suited for that place. That news hit him hard. It only confirmed his insecurity about his lack of strength, especially since he could barely do anything, except for that one last moment. But Saria then told him that there was another place he should truly aim for, and that was the World Union Academy. As she stated this, Gray's eyes widened in shock. What Saria meant was that he shouldn't just aim to be the kingdom's best. He belonged in the world's top institution. That revelation absolutely blew his mind. He was well aware that this was the place where the sword, saint, and other legends had come from. He then asked if someone like him could really be accepted there. Surprisingly, she replied that it was impossible. She knew he recognized it himself. His body was far from fit enough to wield sword. She was aware that if it were the Royal Academy, he might be able to fake it with his skills. But that wouldn't pass in the World Union Academy. She questioned how he'd even acquire such skill. With his feeble body, he knew she was right, because he was well aware that everyone from that academy was a genuine monster, and with his body like that, he can't even hope to compete. A wave of sadness washed over him. Saria noticed his downcast face and questioned why he was giving up. She quickly reminded him that they still had 9 months until the dreaded entrance exam. He countered, "But that's only 9 months." She conceded that it might not seem like enough, but she implored him to put his trust in her. Then, she posed a serious question. "Are you ready to truly suffer for the next 9 months?" He admitted he didn't want to suffer, but resolved to push through it anyway. He then entrusted himself entirely to her care for the grueling 9 months ahead. And RMC's answer clearly pleased her. With that, her entire demeanor shifted, catching Gray completely off guard. A devilish grin spread across her face as she warned him, "This is the start of your living hell." Days blurred into weeks as he endured her rigorous training. He trained without mercy, pushing his limits. Gray consumed both delicious and questionable meals. He sparred relentlessly against her, constantly refining his swordsmanship skills. Our determined MC was dead set on making it to the entrance exam. 8 months later, the changes were undeniable. Saria noted his new, impressive musculature, and with that, her lessons for him were complete. She urged him to head out there, full of confidence. Gray looked puzzled, but there's still a whole month until the exam. She patiently explained that taking an exam in unfamiliar surroundings would be anything but easy, which is why arriving early was his best bet. She handed him money for the journey and a month's worth of provisions. He hesitated, a subtle reluctance in his gaze. He felt going a whole month early seemed excessive. He suspected she was trying to chase him out of the village. She simply retorted that he was overthinking things. He then brought up the recent discovery of an ogre's nest, found suspiciously close to their village. That news visibly surprised her, as he added that the village had virtually no guards. She tried to maintain a cool facade, assuring him it had nothing to do with their plans. She quickly reassured him that help would surely arrive from the royal capital, so they wouldn't have a single thing to worry about. She pressed him to go to the exam without a care in the world, but he could see right through her lie. He knew no aid would ever reach the village, and just before the village met its end, his master would tragically lose her life. In his past life, news had spread of her demise when she went to confront the ogre alone, but he simply responded, saying he understood her intentions. He thanked her and told her he was heading off. She smirked, wishing him good luck on the exam. Later that night, skeletons hung from a tree, with sticks brutally piercing through their mouths. Saria then arrived in the eerie forest. Following the scout's report, she traversed deeper into the woods, where she soon discovered a trail of blood. It led straight into an unsettling den, but she abruptly stopped when a voice called out, asking, "Where do you think you're going?" As she glanced up, she saw Gray perched on a tree branch. He smiled at her, addressing her as Master. She looked utterly shocked to see him. She questioned what he was doing here, when he should be heading to the academy. He returned the question, recalling her earlier words. That ogre nest would be handled by the army. From the royal capital, she explained the army couldn't make it, due to an unexpected emergency. So, she resolved to deal with it herself. She confidently assured him she alone was enough, having already assessed the nest's strength. From the scout's report, she revealed the boss was an elite ogre, and the nest contained around 40 to 50 monsters total. She admitted that the sheer number of minions would be a bit tricky. Thinking about it, Gray knew it wasn't that strong, but the ogre's true power lay in its intelligence and leadership skills. Gray was well aware of the danger of being surrounded, which made fighting alone absolutely suicidal, and he was certain of one grim fact. If he let his master go in alone, she wouldn't make it out alive. The village would inevitably be destroyed by the ogres. He'd witnessed that future with his very own eyes. He made it clear he wanted to join her. She refused, insisting she could handle alone. He pressed on, trying to sway her. He argued he couldn't miss this shot too. Finally gained some real combat experience. Then he directly asked her if she truly thought he'd just get in her way. That question made her chuckle. She knew he was well aware that he wouldn't actually hinder her, especially now that she could no longer beat him in a mock battle. Still, she reasoned, no one truly knows what might happen in a real fight, especially in a monster's nest that suddenly popped up. For such a perilous task, it was always best to wait until he had a bit more real-world combat experience. Realizing she wouldn't budge, he swiftly proposed an alternate plan. Intrigued, she listened as he declared he'd fight her, knock her out cold, then handle the ogres solo. Judging by his stance, he wasn't joking. The dojo fell silent. She eventually relented, but laid down one crucial condition. No matter what trials they faced, he had to return alive. He readily assured her, then wished her the same. Under the moonlight, they hunkered behind a boulder, spying on the sprawling ogre colony. The treacherous terrain left no room for escape, signaling the ogre's confidence in building their nest in such an exposed location. This also meant Gray and Seria were trapped, since they were facing intelligent monsters. He opted to play it incredibly safe. Seria began to carefully observe the colony. She couldn't spot the boss anywhere. Assuming it was likely inside the main tent, they could only hope to thin down their numbers. Before the boss made its grand appearance, she quickly instructed Gray, "Take out any enemies you see on your side, while I handle the other." Gray agreed, and with that, they charged. One ogre twitched, sensing something amiss, but before it could even process what, Seria was already in its face, slashing its head clean off. The other ogre watched its comrade's head roll, and immediately shrieked a warning to the others. And in no time, a massive horde came charging. Meanwhile, on Gray's side of the fight, he was absolutely tearing through enemies, one after another. He moved lightning fast, and Seria was right there with him. It was an undeniable, total bloodbath. Eventually, the two managed to group up. A staggering pile of ogre corpses littered the ground. Seria couldn't help but praise him. She even wondered if it was truly his first time fighting. But Gray quickly changed the subject, telling her to stay sharp. They were just getting started here. Internally, Gray felt a strange sense that something was off. The ogres were far too weak, if they were truly this feeble. He knew his master could have easily handled them alone. That's why he quickly figured out the real danger was lurking inside that tent. A chilling pair of red eyes stared out from the pitch-black tent. They locked onto him, and an intense unease washed over Gray. Without a second's hesitation, he told Seria they had to leave now. He even urgently pressed her to run immediately. Seria, confused, asked what was happening. He looked utterly panicked, shouting for her to just go. Sensing his palpable fear, she finally started to run with him. But just as they did, something massive leaped right over them. To their utter shock, an ogre landed squarely in front of them, completely blocking their escape. Seria scoffed dismissively when she recognized the elite ogre. She even quipped, "It's an honor that the boss came to greet us personally." But Gray grimly corrected her, "That's not the boss." Then, a different ogre let out an absolutely thunderous roar. It was so deafeningly loud, Seria instinctively clapped her hands over her ears. Right after that, a massive swarm of ogres appeared. They were all in a chaotic, rabid frenzy. Stunned by the horrifying sight, she could only gasp and ask, "What in the world is going on?" Behind that horde stood a truly massive ogre. Gray uttered, "That's something far, far stronger than elite." He called it an ogre general. This was the true boss of the entire nest, with the elite ogre guarding their only exit, and a terrifying crowd of ogres blocking their front. They were completely trapped. The ogre general didn't even move, but its sheer presence alone was utterly terrifying. Once she heard the terrifying title, Ogre General, Seria instantly knew they couldn't possibly win this alone. She quickly glanced at the elite ogre. Then she suggested they take out the one right in front of them and make a desperate attempt to escape. She launched a swift attack, but it effortlessly deflected her strike. She focused, slashing with renewed intensity. She managed to land a scratch on its shoulder, but to her utter shock, the wound instantly began to heal. Gray grimly told her it was useless. The general's terrifying roar boosted every ogre's strength and healing. That's why they'd grown so unnaturally strong. And now, she was struggling to even take down a single one. Gray kept fighting, trusting her to cover his back. He told her, "You don't have to win. I just need you to buy me precious time." Worried, she asked what he was planning. He replied there was only one option left, to take down that ogre general bastard. And he absolutely meant it. An axe-wielding ogre knocked Gray's sword aside. Our MC grew irritated every time they tried to flank him. The ogre tried to force his sword from his grasp, then raised its axe for a devastating strike. Right now, Gray was solely focused on taking out every enemy in front of him, but the ogre easily shattered his sword. So he quickly realized his blade couldn't handle the power of a boosted ogre. The ogre swung at him again, and he leaped just in time. He was relieved he had a spare, but he knew this one wouldn't last much longer either. Seria instantly grasped his dire situation and tossed her extra sword to him. He thanked her. Now he had 2 swords, but he knew deep down that still wouldn't be enough to wipe them all out. So he focused his gaze solely on the ogre general and the horde between them. He pulled out the second sword. With one quick, decisive motion, he sliced through the ogres in his way. One of them grazed his cheek as it lunged. He swiftly blocked the blow. As the ogre tried to push him back with its massive axe, he clicked his tongue in frustration, then pressed harder with both of his swords. More ogres surged forward, closing in on him. The ogre general's weapon began to glow ominously. Then came its deafening, earth-shaking roar. Gray flinched. He watched the ogres grow even stronger. They charged at him once more. He realized the ogre general had completely figured out his plan. It roared again, a triumphant bellow. Gray now understood. It was undeniably brilliant. His sword clashed fiercely against the ogre's axe. He was pushed back, but he forced himself to just keep moving. He rushed forward, cutting down as many as he could. And he knew he didn't have time to deal with all of them. Unexpectedly, an ogre tackled him to the ground. It held him firmly while another raised its axe. Gray slashed the clinging ogre across its neck. He realized they were trying to wear him out, wearing his swords down by throwing themselves at him. While dealing with that, a shadow loomed over him. It was an ogre, leaping and ready to punch him. He blocked its powerful fist with his sword, but the force blasted him away. Gray coughed up blood, his body trembling. He was breathing heavily, his last sword shattered. He was now down to his very last sword. He couldn't believe he had to take on hordes of ogres and their general with just one sword. And because of his past experience, he regressed. He could tell there was no way he could win. He then thought to himself, since that was the case, he told her, "Master, run, while the ogres are focused on me." She was amused, but she couldn't do that. Saria replied, still fending off attacks. He questioned her, "Do you plan to die for nothing?" He assured her he would run after her, but she simply told him it wasn't. She had a grim expression on her face, until a resigned look crossed her face. As she admitted, "I can't run anymore." Her leg was slashed, bleeding heavily. Gray turned pale, aghast at the sight. Now he truly ran out of options. In his mind, he had gone back in time with one goal, to defeat the liquidators. He swung his sword desperately, all while thinking his life might just end right here. His last sword shattered, but he refused to give up. He tried to remember how that power had felt back then. He thought about tapping into it again, with one ultimate goal, to defeat his enemies. While ogres readied themselves to attack him, he forced himself to remember. He tried to recall the feeling he'd had back then. Gray shut his eyes, clenching them tight. And as the last piece of his sword flew, right in front of him, his eyes snapped open, blazing a furious red. He finally felt it, unleashing his shadow-infused sword. With one swift motion, he delivered a fatal strike to several ogres. A mysterious mist shrouded part of his face and his blade. Saria looked confused, while Gray wore a grim expression. But as he met her gaze, he offered a reassuring smile and told her it was all right. With another powerful swing, he severed several heads. The ogre general's sword began to glow once more, but in a split second, it was mercilessly cut down. Saria noticed this, but while she was distracted, an ogre cunningly tried to sneak up on her. She then realized the attacks felt surprisingly weak. She remarked that these monsters used to give her a tough time, but now she could slice through them with effortless ease. She declared that without the general's power boost, they were nothing. It was already deep into the night when they finally defeated the last of the ogres. Gray apologized for breaking her sword. She didn't mind, especially since he'd saved her life. He then handed it back to her. She was about to question him about the strange power he'd used when Gray suddenly collapsed. He fell, face down, to the cold ground. Saria panicked, calling out his name frantically. Gray's consciousness drifted into a terrifyingly dark realm. Where am I? He wondered to himself. Everything was utterly pitch black, except for a single, ominous door directly in front of him. He looked around, utterly confused. Then, black flames erupted, burning through the chains on the door. He recognized it instantly. It was the very same power he had just tapped into. He wondered, would opening that door grant him that immense power again? The mere thought made him incredibly uneasy. Still, he cautiously stepped toward it. But suddenly, he felt a terrifying presence right behind him. It made him freeze, stumbling backward in fear. His breathing grew rapid and shaky. Deep down, he just knew that if he opened that door, in his current state, he would undoubtedly die. Then, out of nowhere, a disembodied voice declared he made the right choice. And just like that, he jolted violently awake. He was gasping for air, drenched in a cold sweat. Saria, startled, exclaimed that he was finally awake. He weakly asked where he was. Saria told him he was in the village infirmary, adding that he had been unconscious for 5 long days. She then confessed she was terrified. He might never wake up. Realizing he'd been unconscious for 5 days, he knew he had pushed his body far past its limits. Saria interjected. Pushing himself hardly described what he actually did, but setting that aside for now, she checked to see if he was able to move. Gray attempted to move, but he quickly realized he couldn't summon any strength. His right arm, he could move with immense effort, but deeply worried him. What if he could never wield his sword again? Even worse, a strange bruise marred it. It looked as if someone had splattered black ink directly onto his arm. Saria expected him not to be able to move it well. Gray wondered if she could even perceive the dark mark. He then informed her he couldn't put any strength into his dominant arm. It was just as she suspected. It wouldn't heal properly anytime soon. All the bones in his right arm were completely shattered. He was utterly shocked it didn't even hurt. She explained they used a powerful magic potion to treat it. That stunned him. Magic potions were incredibly expensive. She told him not to worry. The village chief himself had provided it. Gray couldn't fathom why the chief would give something so valuable to someone like him. She asked what he was talking about, then gently reminded him he was the village's hero. Gray was utterly clueless. Suddenly, someone burst into the room. It was the village chief himself. Gray immediately thanked him for the potent potion, but the chief insisted they should be thanking him. With profound emotion, the chief declared that Gray had fought an ogre general, a monstrous foe that even gathered troops from nearby towns, couldn't even scratch. And that caliber of monster had come for their village. He clasped Gray's hand tightly and stated, if Gray hadn't slain it, the village would have been utterly wiped out. The chief explained that without him and Saria, there'd be no potion, no infirmary, no survivors. None of them would even be standing there talking. Gray replied that he was surely exaggerating, but the village chief vehemently insisted. He knew deep down that wasn't the case. Gray had considered this at some point. He found himself agreeing with the village chief, because before his regression, the village should have been utterly destroyed by the ogre attack. The village chief then told him that if he still didn't grasp the immense importance of his actions, he'd happily explain everything in detail. He'd also heard that Gray was set to take the academy entrance exam, and asked if that was true. Gray's only response was a stunned, "Oh." Thoughts immediately raced through his mind. He'd killed the ogre a week before the exam, and had been unconscious for 5 whole days. That left him with just 2 days remaining. He instantly turned pale. He remembered the journey to the academy. It was a 3-day walk on horseback. It would take a day by carriage, but he didn't have the money for that. He immediately asked the chief if he could possibly borrow a horse. The chief, however, had expected this, so he had already prepared the best horse in the village for him. With that horse, he'd make it in no time at all. Saria even joked that if he hadn't woken up that day, they would have carried him there while he was still asleep. She then opened the door, and the sunlight made him squint. He saw the horse waiting, surrounded by a huge crowd, holding banners, thanking him and wishing him luck on the exam. Everyone wore bright smiles, showing their heartfelt thanks. Many people even came to thank him personally. One man stepped forward and handed him a small pouch. When he asked what it was, the man said it was something the whole village had pitched in for. They'd heard applying to the World Union Academy was incredibly expensive. Gray was deeply touched by their generous gesture. He smiled and touched thanked them. He then said, "It will be hard to return if I fail the exam." Saria told him not to worry. After all, he's the sole applicant to the World Union Academy. Who's ever defeated an ogre general? But Gray still worried about his right arm. She reminded him his left arm was still perfectly fine. He nodded. Saria declared that was more than enough, and he wouldn't even need to use that power. He argued the exam might not be so easy. Passing it with just one arm hardly sounded simple. Saria reassured him, saying he'd definitely stand out, and the examiners would surely recognize his strength. She was utterly confident, full of belief. She told him, "You will pass." He thanked her, saying that. With her saying it like that, he had no choice but to pass. In his past life, the village had been utterly destroyed, but now it was still standing tall. Gray realized the world wasn't the same anymore, and that meant the future could truly change. All of it thanks to his power. And now he was finally set to go. Eventually, he made it just in time. He even thanked the horse for getting him there. He looked straight ahead and saw a city surrounded by a lake. He had finally arrived at the World Union Academy. At the arena, the host announced they would begin handing out exam tickets until the process was complete. All examinees were to remain inside the central arena. There were a huge number of people, but only 20 would pass. Someone mentioned that the number of successful candidates changes every year. Sometimes 50 made it, other times only one. The host then called Professor Ariel to the front. She walked in and began distributing the exam tickets. Right away, she instructed the examinees to take the paper that would appear right before them. She then snapped her fingers. A brilliant golden light filled the arena. A paper instantly appeared in front of each examinee. Gray was examinee number 513, under the fencing course. He noticed everyone else had theirs too. She then explained they would only see their number and course, and reassured them this was how it's done. Every year, she gave a small grin. She then declared that the World Union Academy wouldn't judge them by age, gender, nationality, or status. Even their names didn't matter. None of those things mattered to the academy. She added that only those who passed the exam and earned the right to cross the bridge would be asked for their name, and even then, they could give a fake one if they wanted. Gray was utterly confused. Even though he'd left his sword at the inn, his paper still assigned him to the fencing course. It made him curious about what kind of system they were using. Then, Professor Ariel explained. They assigned the courses based on appearance. She said if she got anyone's course wrong, they should raise their hand. The examinees were stunned. They couldn't believe she sorted them just by looking, especially with so many people there. Some guessed she had already looked them up. Others thought maybe she used some kind of mind-reading magic, but after a while, no one raised their hand. So, she concluded that no one had been misassigned. Next, she announced their exam schedules. She told everyone to check their tickets. Gray's paper said he was scheduled on the first day at 11 a.m. He did not like it. He was hoping for a little more time to let his arm recover. Professor Ariel reminded them it was a one-shot practical exam. If they were late, they'd be disqualified. No exceptions, no reschedules. Gray clutched his arm, thinking he still couldn't use much strength. He silently prayed it would get a bit better by tomorrow. The next day arrived, and he was in a pinch. Because it didn't heal at all, he had no choice but to take the exam with his arms still in that state. He was called to the entrance of the arena. He took a deep breath and reminded himself not to be pessimistic about it. He evaluated that his left arm was still functional, and he could move his right to an extent. He used the time he had left to watch the examiner's moves and hoping to find an opening. The examiner then instructed the examinee to make the first move. The examinee immediately charged at the examiner. His swings were heavy and powerful, but the examiner simply sidestepped to evade them. The examinee yelled that he wasn't done yet. He gripped his sword with both hands and swung it. The examiner blocked it using only one hand. Witnessing that, the examinee's spirit was utterly crushed. The examiner then charged at him and blasted him away with just a single swing. The guy fell hard onto his back, and the examiner promptly concluded his exam. He was instructed to retrieve his weapon and exit the venue. Seeing all that, a small smile formed on Gray's face. He already knew it. He was totally done for. There was no way in hell he could possibly win. Not long after, the examiner called his number. As he walked toward him, he couldn't believe he had to fight someone who had just taken down a man twice his size. Using only one arm, Gray was instructed to make the first move. He felt like he didn't stand a chance, but he decided to do whatever he possibly could. He charged forward, recalling what Saria had told him, that a sword isn't swung with just your arms, but that you needed to channel your power, generated by your entire body through your arms, even if your right arm is powerless. He thought of driving the force through his other muscles instead. He swung his sword, and the examiner expertly ducked to evade it. Gray was feeling nervous, since he couldn't fight the way he usually does. He thought that if swinging a sword without arm strength was truly that easy, no one would bother training their body in the first place. The examiner then counterattacked. That's when Gray got confused. Because the instructor's sword seemed kind of slow, he was able to block it. He could tell that the examiner had insane power, but his speed and technique didn't even come close to his master's. He believes that if he relies on the swordsmanship he learned from her, he might be able to make up for the difference in arm strength. Gray's eyes sharpened with resolve, thinking, if that's the case, he adjusted his movements accordingly. Soon, he realized the examiner was slow, nowhere near as strong as he'd assumed. He remembered his master's promise. He would pass. Their blades clashed with a fierce clang, and Gray managed to overpower the examiner. That's when faith ignited within him, believing he could do it. The intense sword fight raged on. Even though Gray had analyzed the examiner's swordsmanship, he charged, but the professor deftly evaded him, which led Gray to a crucial realization. The power difference was just too immense. He couldn't break the examiner's perfect form. It hammered home the fact that winning with only one hand wouldn't be easy. After all, despite his limitations, as their sparring match progressed, the examiner's movements grew increasingly rough. While Gray formulated a daring, risky move, he found his moment, baiting the examiner closer. The examiner attacked, exactly as Gray had planned, for him to make a wide, open swing. The examiner shifted his weight to his right foot, knowing it would leave a perfect opening. He knew most opponents would commit to a big, obvious swing in that situation. But unexpectedly, Gray was already behind the examiner. The examiner was completely caught off guard. RMC knew one crucial thing. No matter the immense power gap, if he could get behind his foe, victory was possible. But then, a sudden command to halt rang out, the tip of his blade, just an inch from the examiner's back. Gray wondered if the match was truly over. He thought it felt a bit too early to stop. The other examiner then announced that his time limit had officially been reached. His eyes widened as the final result was announced. It was a draw. Gray was sure he hadn't made the cut. His grip on the sword loosened, as if his very body had given up. He left the arena, deflated, feeling utterly defeated despite giving his all to pass. He knew that if he couldn't beat this examiner, things would be incredibly difficult for him ahead. He expects his arm to finally heal next year. Looks like he'll have to face that exam again. Before he left, he gave it one last, lingering glance and murmured a quick thank you. A mere week later, at meeting room 53 within the World Union Academy, the Academy head turned to the professors, asking for their thoughts on the candidates. With all their exams now finished, one professor admitted he was utterly exhausted. A senior professor then pointed out that this collective observation method proved rather inefficient and suggested dividing the workload next year. Another professor shot back, defending that they couldn't afford to overlook a single talent, simply just to make things easier on themselves. The head let out a sigh, reminding them that he'd asked for their thoughts on the examinees, not the system. He started with the examinees from the swordsmanship course. He asked who passed. They all watched the screens, and one professor stated that, as always, those who beat the examiners passed automatically. The rest would be judged on the quality they showed and how well they endured the 15-minute time limit. He then asked the other swordsmanship course instructors what their thoughts were. One professor replied that, other than those who outright beat the examiner, candidates number 5, 217, and 753 truly stood out. The other person suggested they keep it at that, since even if others joined, they simply wouldn't be able to keep up in class. The professor agreed. and asked if anyone thought otherwise. The meeting continued, and eventually the head concluded that they had confirmed the successful candidates for the swordsmanship course. But then someone asked about candidate number 513. The head glanced at the speaker. It was Professor Ariel. She asked them what they thought about candidate 513. They all turned their attention to the screen. One professor called candidate 513 a little guy. When they watched his fight, it looked like he'd win. But if he relied solely on setting up traps, just to beat the examiner, things would become quite difficult for him. They all agreed his technique was good, but his strength was clearly lacking. It felt like he was outmatched from the very start. The brown-haired professor with a mustache bluntly stated, "He's not good." Everyone agreed, but Professor Ariel was speechless. She couldn't believe so many had watched, yet not a single one of them noticed. She thought if everyone was this blind, then observing together was a complete waste. The very next day, Gray was clutching his exam ticket. The results for the swordsmanship course were finally about to be announced. Only 6 people passed. Everyone waited nervously. The first to be called was candidate number 5. As their number was called, their exam ticket burned. Then came candidate 217. Next were numbers 432 and 615. Then 753 and 925. And that was it. Gray looked utterly crushed when his number wasn't called. The successful candidates were told to cross the bridge and finish enrollment by the end of the day. Gray was completely downcast, while others around him cheered for the passers. He wore a heartbroken look after failing. Then came another announcement. The Divine Eye Special Admission. Just a few seconds later, Gray's number was called, and his exam ticket burned in brilliant blue flames. Everyone around him was utterly shocked. Gray stood frozen, completely confused. People in the crowd started to sneer. It was Gray's first time hearing about this special admission. Some said the Academy must have cheated. They claimed the World Union Academy had sunk to a new low. Gray overheard them. He was confused since he had no connections. He wondered if his master did something, but he hadn't heard anything. An old man scolded the crowd for talking like that about the Divine Eye admission. He said it was a prestigious category that produced heroes for centuries. But the crowd didn't buy it. They said it was only respected long ago. They pointed out recent Divine Eye picks. Amy White, Bella Albright. They were Leek Muller and Jacob Bloomfield, who were branded as failures. Even current candidates had heard the chilling tales. But Gray, he knew better. These 3 had been part of the elite force that fought against the fearsome Liquidator. Now, Gray's name stood right alongside theirs. Suddenly, an announcement rang out in the academy. The entrance ceremony would begin in just 30 minutes. Once the students had finished getting changed, they were instructed to gather in the plaza, right in front of the main office. Their uniforms featured a black patch with the Academy's symbol proudly engraved. Our MC, of course, looked absolutely dashing. A few students arrived at the plaza early, but they weren't quite sure it was the correct spot, since absolutely nothing was set up. Suddenly, a man came sprinting towards them, apologizing profusely for the delay, explaining there'd been a slight mix-up. He kindly asked the students to step back a little, so he could set up the stairs right there. The students quickly moved aside and asked if their new spot was all right. The man grinned, declaring it perfect. Then he knelt down, leaving the students utterly confused. He touched the ground, and BEM, a massive magic circle materialized. The very ground beneath them began to rumble and shift. The students' jaws collectively dropped. They watched in awe as a massive structure began to rise, right before their astonished eyes. The man, once again, apologized for the delay and told them to grab a seat wherever they pleased. The students were absolutely dumbfounded with amazement. They quickly realized this was powerful teleportation magic, but still couldn't quite believe something so monumentally huge could be teleported. Gray took his seat, pondering to himself. The school likely wanted the ceremony to take place in a spot where their impressive building could be fully admired. To Gray, this felt like an utterly extravagant use of teleportation magic. He definitely looked quite excited after truly realizing just how powerful the World Union Academy truly was. The students had noticed there were far too many seats. Only 30 students had been accepted, after all, so this many seemed completely unnecessary. The girl she was speaking with looked utterly surprised. She wasn't even sure why she was apologizing. She explained that, besides sword training, she hadn't really studied much else. The girl offered to explain everything. She said that, as the name suggests, the academy gathers top students from across the globe. Then, she pointed at something in the sky. The other girl was absolutely shocked. To see aircraft and dragons soaring overhead, she had to ask, "What are those?" Gray was stunned to see the magic airship, the Strato Queen. He'd boarded it once before, when he joined the Liquidator Subjugation Squad. It was said to be one of the biggest airships in the world. He couldn't believe they used it just for an entrance ceremony. The World Union Academy definitely exceeded all of Gray's expectations. The airship landed and the students disembarked. Now, with everyone present, the entrance ceremony could finally begin. Eventually, the headmaster's long speech ended. Gray looked bored, thinking to himself, this entrance ceremony isn't any different from a normal one. The next part of the program involves greetings from the top students of each course. Leon Hart, the top student of the swordsmanship course, was called to the front. As he rose from his seat and made his way onto the stage, the students buzzed with gossip about him. They'd heard he defeated the examiner in an instant during the entrance exam. Some even whispered that he's as skilled as any of the professors when it comes to swordsmanship. This student is Leonard Appius. Gray watched him before reaching the mic. He confirmed with the heads if he was allowed to speak freely. They replied, yes, and he thanked them. Then, he stated he had one complaint that he'd like to make to the academy. Before continuing, he greeted his fellow students and all those admitted to the academy through a proper way. He then stated that it was an honor to be admitted to the academy with the rest of them. He told them they should graduate as individuals, capable of making meaningful contributions to the world, so he urged them to work together. He added that he was looking forward to the days when they could aim high together as students of the prestigious World Union Academy, but he expressed that there were those among them who didn't deserve to be there. He asked Professor Ariel if he was correct. It caught her off guard. She stated that all the students there had passed the rigorous exams, and though they might not be as strong as him, she didn't think it was a wise idea to exclude them. Then she asked him why he was asking her that. Leon Hart glared at her, stating that he wasn't talking about those admitted by properly passing the exams. He stated that what he meant were the students she'd backdoored into the Divine Eye. Special admission. Then he dared the specially admitted student to show himself, ordering him to return his uniform and leave the academy. Tension filled the air. Gray couldn't understand why he was so hostile. Then he recalled that Leon Hart was sitting right next to him. He was relieved that Leon Hart didn't know his face. He was thinking that he wouldn't get caught up in it if he didn't step forward. Professor Ariel acknowledged that the students for that year were quite lively. Leon Hart felt like no one was taking him seriously. He called her out, telling her to stop letting students in through the back door. She didn't say much at first. Then in the blink of an eye, she leaned in and whispered in his ear, asking if he really thought he was stronger than that kid. Her move was so unexpected it shocked the whole arena. Leon Hart was caught off guard. He gritted his teeth and said, yes. Then he asked if she was trying to prove him wrong. Professor Ariel liked his confidence and suggested a bet that piqued his interest. She bet both her job and the kid's admission. Gray was confused by everything happening. Leon Hart turned to Professor Ariel and asked if she was trying to make him fight the special admission kid. Professor Ariel calmly replied. She declared she'd never do anything so dull. She then added that if Gray truly went all out, Lane Hart would undoubtedly end up dead. As a responsible teacher, she insisted she would never put their lives at such risk. Lane Hart's veins practically bulged with fury. He felt deeply insulted, but she merely stated that she was simply stating the facts. Instead, she proposed a safer alternative, a bet involving monsters. She pointed out that Leon Hart was far better at fighting monsters than people. He glared at her but begrudgingly admitted she knew him quite well. He then asked what the actual wager entailed. She explained it very simply. Each of them would fight a monster chosen by her. The monsters would progressively get stronger with each round. Whoever failed to defeat their monster first would lose the bet. If Gray lost, Professor Ariel would be forced to retire, and the special admission students would be expelled. But if Leon Hart lost, he'd have to do absolutely anything she commanded. She then asked if he was game. Leon Hart wanted to know what kind of monsters they'd be up against. He was confident in his own skills, but didn't want to get entangled in anything too strange. After a moment of thought, she revealed their first target, an ogre general. She then teasingly asked if that was too easy for him. The entire class was utterly stunned, but Gray remained unfazed. Instead, he was curious why she chose that specific monster. Leon Hart, on the other hand, was absolutely furious. He bellowed that an ogre general wasn't something a single person could defeat all by themselves. Professor Ariel clarified that they didn't have to do it immediately. They'd be given a full year to prepare. Leon Hart snapped back. If someone could solo a disaster-level monster in just a year, people wouldn't be suffering in the first place. He yelled at her to pick something far more realistic, trying to catch his breath. He paused, then suddenly realized her true plan. He believed she was deliberately choosing something impossible, just so there wouldn't be a clear winner. But with confidence, he declared he wasn't going to play along. Ariel smirked and added one last condition. If the match ended in a draw, then Leon Hart would be considered the winner. Basically, if Gray failed to defeat the ogre general, she would be fired, and all the special students would be expelled. She asked him what he thought about that. He looked at her like she was crazy. He couldn't shake the feeling that the bet was already stacked against him. She took his silence as agreement. Just to be clear, he said, "It better not be a weakened ogre general," or anything like that. She calmly replied, "Of course." Then, with a flick of her hand, a feather pen appeared out of thin air. She told him that the terms were already written in a magic contract, and he could sign it if he had no objections. He read the contract and chose to go through with it. Still, he had to ask, did she really believe that the kid could win? Her answer was vague, she said. Who knows? Then she quietly returned to her seat. The other professors whispered among themselves, wondering what was wrong with her. Some thought she was just using the bed as an excuse to retire. It wasn't too far-fetched. She was past her prime. After all, Gray had no choice now. The bet was official, but something bugged him. Why did she include the one he defeated before enrollment, when she said the time frame was a full year? She then watched our MC in silence. Gray realized the bet was already sealed the moment it started as he stared at her. She put a finger to her lips, telling him to stay quiet. That's when Gray knew she played dirty. Eventually, the opening ceremony ended, and everyone went to their assigned classes. The first subject was basic magic. It was surprising to some that the lecture started right away, on day one, but as students of the academy, they needed to understand that every single day truly mattered. The professor kicked off the lesson by teaching them the fundamentals of magic. This was, naturally, the most fundamental topic. He explained how the body holds a hidden energy, known as ether, by channeling it through the body's magic circuits. He kept writing and explaining everything on the board. Gray was initially in that class. He was worried he might struggle to keep up, but as it turned out, he already knew this entire lesson from boot camp. So far, so good. But a significant problem loomed. Of all the classes he could have chosen, he ended up in the very same one as Leon Hart. He silently prayed that Leon Hart wouldn't discover he was the Divine Eye, the special admission student. The professor noticed Gray looking rather uninterested. He scolded him for already looking away, merely 5 minutes into the lecture. Gray was shocked he got caught with just a quick glance, even though he was seated all the way in the back. He quickly apologized. The professor then challenged him. If he truly looked that confident, why not prove it right here in front of the class? He even taunted him further by expecting him to easily use basic magic. Gray politely explained that, since they were primarily in the swordsmanship course, he thought it was acceptable if they couldn't use magic. The professor countered that Even if you primarily use Asura in combat, it's still crucial to grasp the basics of magic. At the very least, to effectively coordinate with mages. Knowing basic spells and understanding how they feel is absolutely essential. Gray hadn't expected the professor to deliver the very same explanation as the one he'd heard in boot camp. He wondered if the specific spell they'd be learning would also be identical. So he asked if they were about to learn Ether Bullet. The professor raised an eyebrow and questioned if he could already use it. Gray said yes, and he felt immensely relieved. At least the grueling boot camp hadn't been a complete waste. Spotting an opportunity, the professor decided to arrange a match. He knew Leon Hart, who he often called Leon, could also wield an Ether Bullet. Leon Hart readily confirmed this. He added that even before entering the academy, he had trained extensively in both swordsmanship and magic, which, in his opinion, made it a serious risk for any other student to fight him. Seriously, that is. But the professor wasn't worried one bit. He said that even with a massive difference in skill, they were only using Ether Bullets. It's not like anyone would actually die, and he didn't plan on asking Leon Hart to hold back one bit either. Then the professor dropped a bombshell. He revealed that Gray was, in fact, the Divine, a student for the year. Everyone immediately turned to stare at Gray. He knew he was in deep trouble now. The professor grinned like a wicked devil as he exposed everything to the class. Leon Hart responded with chilling coldness. He said he would show Gray how things really worked here and what kind of place the academy truly was. Leon Hart glared at Gray and ordered him to step forward. They stood face to face, tension thick in the air. The professor explained that once he gave the signal, they would fire their ether bullets at each other. Gray had only trained in magic for a mere few days, during boot camp, that is, and even though the professor claimed it wouldn't be fatal, he knew deep down he probably wouldn't walk away completely unscathed. The professor gave the signal to begin. Leon Hart was set on brutally proving how much stronger he was. Gray had no choice. He decided to just go for it. Leon Hart released a small, baby blue orb of light. But when Gray cast his spell, a massive, glowing blue orb formed right in front of him. The very next moment left everyone utterly stunned, their faces frozen in disbelief. Even our MC was completely speechless. Gray's ether bullet completely overpowered Leon Hart's. It made Leon Hart shriek in shock. The professor immediately intervened and frantically formed a barrier in front of Leon Hart to protect him. He was relieved to have seemingly saved him. But to everyone's utter surprise, the barrier shattered. It shattered completely, blasting Leon Hart clear across the room. A powerful gust of wind and a blinding light erupted from it. The other students were also caught in its devastating wake. Leon Hart screamed, a piercing sound echoing through the hall as he crashed hard onto the floor. The professor immediately rushed to his side, anxiously asking if he was all right. Leon Hart slowly stood, insisting he was fine. The professor let out a deep sigh of relief before turning his gaze to Gray. He realized that if the barrier hadn't weakened, Leon Hart could have died from the sheer impact. But even more shocking, none of the professors could produce an ether bullet with that level of power. He turned to Gray, demanding an answer. Gray, what did you just do? Gray, however, was confused. Leon Hart's ether bullet felt so incredibly weak. It didn't even seem like the same spell. It made him wonder, was the ether bullet he learned during his time in the subjugation squad different from the one taught at the academy? He asked if perhaps he had used the wrong spell. The professor quickly said no. It was definitely an ether bullet. But he added that Gray's quality was completely different. It wasn't made from regular ether. It was super compressed ether. The other students had never even heard of such a thing. The professor admitted. It was a kind of power even they struggled to control. Yet, somehow, Gray not only produced it, he shaped it into a coherent spell. He said there was no one else in the entire academy who could pull that off. The students started whispering. It was the first time they'd ever seen an ether bullet with that immense power. Some of them now believed the divine admission existed for this exact reason. Others argued Gray should have been placed in the magic course from the very beginning, instead of being admitted as a special case. But in Gray's mind, something didn't feel right. All the spells he learned at the subjugation squad, boot camp, were like that. And even among his group, he wasn't considered particularly talented. He asked the professor if he was just joking around, since with enough practice, anyone could pull off something similar. The professor burst out laughing. Gray was completely baffled, especially when the professor started laughing even louder. Then, out of nowhere, the professor grabbed him by the shoulders, stepped right into his personal space, and told him to transfer to the magic course. He even offered to personally vouch for him. According to him, Gray possessed far more magical talent than swordsmanship skill. Gray politely declined, saying he'd always been told he wasn't good at magic. The professor looked at him like that was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. He just couldn't believe Gray, someone who understood the ether compression technique well enough to create super compressed ether, thought he lacked talent. He called Gray a once-in-a-generation genius, someone even the Academy would hail as a prodigy. He added that whoever told him he had no magical talent clearly didn't know what they were talking about. Then he asked again, was Gray really sure? He didn't want to switch to the magic course. The professor was known for rarely handing out compliments, so the students were stunned. They couldn't believe he was praising someone this much. He kept pressuring Gray, saying that if someone like him didn't study magic, it would be a loss for the entire world, and even called it a crime against magic itself. Gray let out a nervous laugh. Then something clicked. He suddenly remembered where he had actually heard about the ether compression technique before. In his previous life, back at boot camp, someone once explained that in the old days, people didn't even know that OAD, also called life force, existed. Because of that, casting proper magic was incredibly hard. They had to keep compressing ether inside their bodies and hope that a bit of it would mix with OAD, by chance, just to create a usable spell. A woman with baby blue hair and golden eyes had called that process laughable. Now, in the present, Gray asked the professor if he had ever heard of OAD. The professor looked confused. That reaction confirmed it. This world still didn't know about its existence. Gray realized something big. What he had learned in the subjugation squad was knowledge from the future, and he knew he had to be careful about who he told. The professor brought the topic back and asked again if he was willing to transfer to the magic course. Gray gave a proper bow and apologized. He explained that he loved swords, as grateful as he was for the offer. He had to decline. The professor accepted his decision, but he told Gray that if he ever changed his mind, he was welcome to come to him anytime. Gray thanked him sincerely. Then the professor told him to go back to his seat. He also added that from now on, he wouldn't scold Gray for looking bored in class, or even for leaving early, because he knew this lecture was far too basic for someone like Gray. The other students were impressed. They couldn't believe that Professor Carlos thought so highly of Gray. Meanwhile, Leon Hart watched him closely. He clutched his chest, his cheeks turned slightly pink as he looked at Gray with admiration. He even called him Lord Gray. Gray felt a chill run down his spine. It was honestly a little creepy. Later that day, Gray received a letter from Professor Ariel, asking him to come to her office after class. The sudden summons caught him off guard. He wondered if it had something to do with Professor Carlos. He guessed she might also be planning to recommend he switched to the magic course. When he reached her office, he stood in front of the door. Before he could knock, Professor Ariel called out from inside, saying it wasn't locked. He walked in, but then he was suddenly attacked. He quickly drew his sword and blocked the attack with ease. The girl who struck at him was stunned. Gray realized he reacted purely on instinct, but he still wanted to know why did she attack him. Then he got a good look at her face and was shocked. She looked familiar, like someone he had seen before. Someone from across the table said that he did great. It was Professor Ariel, and Gray had just proven that her eyes were right. The man on the side asked if Bella wasn't holding back. He had to confirm if she had received an instruction from Ariel. To go easy, her movements were flawless, but to have her sword be knocked out of her hand so easily was unnatural. Hearing her name, Gray had confirmed that she really was Bella Albright. She was the Grand Sorceress. Ariel couldn't believe that those two men were seriously saying those things she suggested that, if they couldn't tell if Bella was holding back or not, they should quit as a professor. The professor replied that they were just joking. Since he lost, he gave her the coins. Gray had to ask what they were doing. Ariel replied that they were betting on whether he can fend off Bella's surprise attack or not, and thanks to him, she made a good amount of money. Then she threw him his share. His jaw dropped upon seeing the gold coin. It was worth a fortune. And the other professor started saying that it was just as she said. They noticed that from that exchange earlier, Gray deliberately didn't use his dormant arm, almost as if he was trying to protect his immobile arm. One professor speculated if it was from an injury. The other thinks that, rather than an apparent physical injury to the muscles, it was more like a deeper kind of wound. The professor agreed that a simple injury wouldn't cause that. Gray couldn't believe that. They could tell it just from looking. The professors replied that, if they couldn't tell that much, they wouldn't be professors in the academy, though Professor Ariel was already aware about it. During the exam, Professor Ariel told them to leave. Now that they understand, she told them that he's her student and she wouldn't just give him up. The professors conceded that Gray definitely has potential, but if his wound doesn't heal, it still means he failed to meet the academy's strict admission standards. Before they departed, they warned him to keep that in mind, and with that, they were gone. Now that the pesky professors were gone, Professor Ariel brought up the topic of magic. They settled into a conversation over tea. She'd heard he used a super compressed ether in Professor Carlos's class. He was surprised she already knew. She replied that Professor Carlos came to her office and asked her to transfer Gray to the magic department. Of course, she declined, because to her, he's more suited to wielding a sword than magic. RMC wasn't expecting to hear that from her. She added that he doesn't look good at magic compression at all, and he showed no signs of having practiced it. He was stunned that she simply knew just by looking. Because of that, he decided not to lie. It was exactly as she said. She then asked what trick he used. She promised not to divulge it to anyone else, and would even give him a reward. She really needs to know for Bella's sake. He almost thought she was a sorceress. Professor Ariel explained that Bella truly was a genius when it comes to magic theory, but she's far from the best at actually wielding it. For some reason, she just can't use the ether compression technique effectively. That's why she can't create super compressed ether. Gray had heard before that Bella was a late bloomer. Professor Ariel continued, saying that, for what she'd heard from Professor Carlo, when Gray used super compressed ether, he didn't look like he compressed ether at all. So, if there's a way to use super compressed ether without actually compressing ether, then Bella won't have to be sent to Professor Varian. Gray recognized the name. He asked if she meant Professor Varian Bradley. She realized he knew him well. It's impossible not to know him, because he's absolutely infamous. After all, he's conducted countless experiments on humans, murdering many along the way. To make matters worse, he's caused magic disasters that claimed the lives of tens of thousands. He's history's most notorious magic criminal. Gray was shocked he still hadn't been caught. Then, Professor Ariel shared that if Bella can't master super compressed ether by the end of the year, she'll be sent to him for surgery. He was stunned to hear this, knowing how terrible an idea it was. Professor Ariel agreed. Though the surgery is disguised as an enhancement of her magic abilities, it's actually human experimentation. It hasn't been made public, but rumor has it that because of him, some people have died, while others were left shattered. Bella admitted it was dangerous and scary, but she'll be expelled by the end of the year if she can't master super compressed ether. Professor Ariel confessed she honestly wished Bella would just quit the academy and have that man tamper with her body. The magic Gray knew was knowledge that didn't yet exist. If he told him now, he might completely change the course of history. He saw Bella trembling, which made him recall his past encounter with the Liquidator and how utterly helpless he'd felt. He realized there was no reason not to share, especially when that hellhole called the future was much better off changed. He replied that he understood and promised to teach Bella how to master super compressed ether. That evening, in the arena, he scribbled notes on the board. It was everything he knew about magic, and he reminded them of their promise, not to tell anyone what he'd just shared. Professor Ariel quickly assured him of that. They'd even sign a magic contract, and if they broke it, they died. He asked them what they thought of his revelations. Professor Ariel admitted that just learning about OD had already blown her mind, but the magic knowledge he'd revealed was beyond anything. Bella remarked that it was concise yet impeccably organized. To her, it felt like she was listening to a magic class from hundreds of years in the future. Simply hearing his explanation alone has definitely advanced the history of magic by a full century. He replied that it was inspired by her lecture from 10 years in the future, but he understood that it sounded like a 100-year advancement to someone from their current era. Professor Ariel then mused that there was a lot of information she couldn't quite properly judge. She then asked Bella if she thought what he said was true. Bella replied, confident, "There's a very good chance the theory is correct, and none of it contradicts our current magic theory. Plus, the quickest way to find out is to test it. That's precisely why they were there. If everything Gray had said was true, the spell should definitely work." She handed them the copy. He read it, utterly confused. She then released a dazzling light from her staff to demonstrate her full strength. Based on the theory, if you remember correctly, Bella's full strength was said to be capable of burning down an entire city. Moreover, she was said to be unable to properly control her powerful magic output. Before he could even finish that thought, her power expanded, baffling even Bella, and the very next thing they knew, her power erupted. The concentrated magic burst straight to the heavens. No one had ever expected her to release this much mana. It was such an overwhelming power. If she hadn't taken control of the magic, a split second earlier, he would have died. She had literally saved his life. Meanwhile, Bella was ecstatic that she had done it. Plus, she was able to control it too. She formed a dragon with her magic, finding it utterly fun. But she was completely depleted of ether and passed out. Gray panicked, but Professor Ariel calmly told him to relax. Bella simply fell asleep because she ran out of her ether. She told him to just let her rest. Gray let out a sigh of relief. Professor Ariel couldn't help but exclaim that Bella was truly marvelous. To assemble magic on that scale in such a short amount of time was astounding. Even if she'd been asleep, Bella humbly replied that she wasn't the amazing one. It was the theory itself. Because of it, she could easily create a super compressed ether. Gray thought to himself, asterisk, but it's your theory, asterisk. Though, Professor Ariel was relieved to hear that Bella no longer needed the surgery. Now that she could create a super compressed ether, she planned to personally tell Bradley to call it off. She was glad, but even more so, that Bella hadn't lost her magic control. Gray inquired about this. She explained that even if a variant surgery could increase one's magical output, it came at the expense of control. Exactly how it worked was a secret, but it seemed to be a procedure that forcibly broke one's magical limiter. This made Gray realize that the reason the sorceress in the past world couldn't control her powerful magic was likely due to that very surgery. Professor Ariel then pointed out that it was thanks to Gray that Bella could now use a super compressed ether. With that, the contract had been fulfilled, and it was time for Ariel to fulfill her part of the agreement. The first thing on her list was to use magic. On his arm, as she released her magic, magical butterflies emerged as well. She gently touched his hand, and the butterflies swirled around them. The magic surged stronger, and once finished, she asked how he felt. He tried clenching his hand, and to his utter surprise, he could move it. He profusely thanked her for it. He was utterly puzzled, because not even a magic healing potion could cure it. She scoffed, telling him not to compare a nerve, restoring magic with average healing potions. Then, she asked if he could move his hand exactly as it used to. She suggested he swing a sword to find out for himself. Our boy took a step back from her and swung a sword. He was confused at first, so he kept swinging. He felt strange. It didn't feel like it moved quite as well as it used to. She told him that she has repaired his nerves, but her magic can't heal the wounds in his soul. He asked about it. She emphasized that he heard her right. Then she told him that the recent magic knowledge hasn't proven the existence of one soul yet, but she believes it does after all. She can see it with her eye. She can see that his soul was slowly healing. It will heal naturally, as long as he doesn't overexert himself. He thought about it and asked if he should refrain from practicing his swords. She told him that it's fine to exercise, as he normally would. She was actually curious. What kind of swordsmanship could harm one's soul? Like that. He didn't know what to say. Then she stated that there's already an example of swordsmanship that uses one's soul to move the sword. She's talking about Amy White. She knew he already knew her. Gray was confused why she's mentioning the Sword Saint. Then, and during that era, they haven't even met because of his silence. Professor Ariel asked if she was wrong. She told him that the way he wields his sword gives her the impression that he learned it from Amy. And when she thought about it again, she noticed a slight difference. It made her think that the person he learned swordsmanship from must have been more skilled than Amy. She told him to give it a few more years, and Amy would just be as skilled as his master. Gray was astonished that she could even think that far. He replied that he learned his swordsmanship at a dojo in his hometown. At this point, he had to change the topic, because if he let this conversation continue, he might end up spilling everything. So he asked if it was possible for one's soul to be damaged because of swordsmanship. She replied no. At the very least, not with any swordsmanship. Simply put, there was no way that something ordinary could defeat an ogre general with just one slash, not to mention ruthlessly cutting down both ogres and the surrounding trees. Gray then realized she already knew the answer. Of course she would, and thanks to his actions, she had practically won their bet. She admitted honestly that she'd glimpsed some of the remaining scenes, and they were utterly magnificent. Not even the most sophisticated cleaving magic could have achieved that feat. This made her conclude he must have used the mysterious power within him. He asked if she could truly see it with her own eyes. She confidently replied, yes. She could see the power leaking through the chain door. This made him recall the door he himself had seen. It's not something one can simply figure out by guessing. So he was truly convinced she could actually see it. Then she shared that she'd seen power similar to his, though she didn't believe they were exactly the same. Just a similar vibe, she clarified. He then asked if there were others with powers similar to his own. She replied, yes, but also admitted she was uncertain if they were truly human or not. She then told him they were called the Liquidators, and seeing his expression, she could tell he had heard of them before. He was bewildered why that name was being mentioned now. In this particular period of time, Professor Ariel realized he knew of them. In all honesty, she didn't think it was that well known. She stated that since Gray knew about future gazing magic theory, it wasn't entirely surprising. He just laughed it off, thinking that it really was knowledge from the future, but no one else realized it yet. She asked him how much he knew about the Liquidators. He replied that he only knew they were an extremely dangerous threat to humanity, and that they had to be stopped before they appeared. If that proved impossible, then they must be destroyed no matter what it took. She replied that he was being a bit extreme, though she agreed they were dangerous. But even so, Varian was intent on continuing his experiments. Gray asked how Professor Varian was related to them. She was confused why he would ask. Then, she revealed the Liquidator was none other than the very being he was desperately trying to summon. This was completely new information to him. He had no idea the Liquidator was man-made. But reflecting on his last encounter with the Academy, they had acted as if they knew exactly where the Liquidator would appear. Then it clicked. He was absolutely alarmed that the Academy had been involved in the summoning. This whole time, he yelled that the experiment had to be stopped immediately, to which Professor Ariel readily agreed. But unfortunately, the one running, it was a professor just like her, so she lacked the authority to shut him or his experiment down. She had pushed the higher-ups to cancel it, but they simply wouldn't listen. Gray questioned, who exactly are these higher-ups? She didn't have the authority to tell him that either. She summed it up, unless the orders came from above, no one could force the experiment to stop. He was disappointed that not even a single name was given. He realized that the Academy's leadership was far more tangled than he had ever thought. But if this person was a criminal, then it drastically changed things in the last world. Varian's illegal experiments had killed tens of thousands, and he even knew where he had carried them out. He then revealed that he knew where Varian conducted the illegal experiments. He thought of catching him red-handed, but Professor Ariel told him that wouldn't work either. He asked why not. She explained that entering an Academy professor's research facility without permission was a serious crime on its own, and if they couldn't produce hard evidence, they would be the ones getting locked up. This made her ask if he had proof of his crimes. He became silent. She continued, stating that if not, then they had to put off the conversation for the time being. He realized she knew how dangerous it was, and her hands were completely tied. He simply replied that he understood her situation. Then, she changed the subject, shifting to talk about his power. She asked if he wanted to learn how to control it. This definitely piqued his interest. He wondered if she could actually pull that off. She explained that a professor at the Academy was exceptionally skilled at handling unknown forces. His name? Heathcote Longfellow. He knew exactly who that was. The very same person who had trained the legendary sword saint herself. She'd expected this to grab his attention. So she was planning to arrange for him to start private training, with him starting tomorrow. He was absolutely thrilled with this news. After all, the sole reason he came to the Academy was to master his innate power. He never expected to find a lead this fast. The very next day, Heathcote Longfellow was attacking him. He couldn't quite believe it. He was getting private lessons from Heathcote Longfellow himself, but he was confused why they were just running. They were deep in the middle of the forest, and even if Heathcote was far ahead, he could tell Gray's mind was wandering. Heathcote yelled that if he had room for stray thoughts, then he should just pick up the pace. He instructed him to run until his body reached its absolute limit. "Listen up," Heathcote shouted. He then lectured him. "Only once you've burned away every drop of your physical strength will your soul's power truly awaken. And as long as you have even a scrap of stamina left, we won't be touching swords." He replied, "Yes, sir." He had faith that since this was Heathcote's training, it must mean something important. But he also didn't like that. While he was out running laps, Varian was carrying out his sinister experiments to summon the Arbiter. They continued running as he questioned himself. Was this really what he should be doing right now? Later that day, he reported back to Professor Ariel. She was aware it had already been a week of training. "So how was it?" she asked. He replied that it was mostly just running, with a bit of sword drills at the very end. At the very end, he admitted he felt stronger, though. She let out a laugh, commenting it sounded just like him. Mid-conversation, a knock echoed at the door. That person then handed Professor Ariel a letter. She read it, and afterwards, a terrifying expression crossed her face. He immediately asked what was wrong. She handed him the letter, and as he read it, he, too, wore the same displeased expression. The letter to Professor Ariel concerned Bella, who had succeeded in super-compressed ether, and it appeared she had gained a power closely resembling it. However, upon closer examination, it was clear she hadn't actually compressed it. Therefore, her new ability cannot be recognized as super-compressed ether. So, their contract remains valid, and the surgery would proceed as scheduled. It was from Varian Bradley, and Gray was furious. "This is insanity," he roared. Professor Ariel could tell. Varian was determined to force her into surgery, even if she didn't need it anymore. He asked if Bella couldn't refuse. She replied that, unfortunately, the contract was airtight, unless Varian himself voids it. Bella's only choices were expulsion or the operation. Gray couldn't accept that. She expressed that she needed his help. She wanted to know where Varian's lab was, because if they exposed him as a criminal, the contract would be null and void. He was caught off guard, but in a few seconds he smiled. Then he reminded her of what she'd said. It was dangerous without proof. She replied that they'd find evidence. She placed her faith in him. Thinking about it, she admits she could have done that already, from the start, because her eyes had told her. He was telling the truth. The entire time, it just took her so long to admit it. She demanded he show her the way. and together they would bring Varian's crimes to light. Gray informed Professor Ariel that Varian's laboratory was located in the mountains, near the village of Torowell. She recalled he had an academy-authorized laboratory there. He just couldn't believe that. He'd been running illegal experiments in an authorized lab. She then explained that there was truly no better spot for illicit experiments than there. Nobody would even bat an eye, even if he stayed there for ages. And what's more, no academy professor would dare interfere with another's personal lab space. But as long as they secured evidence of his crimes, they wouldn't be charged for breaking into his lab. Suddenly, a knock echoed from the door. Professor Ariel gestured for her to enter. Bella informed her she'd received the letter. Professor Ariel took it from her hands and reassured her not to worry, because she would personally handle it. Bella was just about to question what she meant. She asked if the professor was truly planning to confront Varian, all for her sake. She then wondered if she'd take him on all by herself. Professor Ariel simply looked amused. Then she confidently replied that she alone was enough. Bella then turned to Gray. Gray quickly spoke up, telling the professor to wait, because he was coming along. Bella wanted to join them too, especially since this whole mess was her problem. Professor Ariel warned them to hold their horses, because they'd be going up against a powerful academy professor. Not only that, but he was also a complete lunatic who had repeatedly performed extremely dangerous human experiments. If he managed to catch one of them, there's no telling what horrors he'd inflict. She absolutely couldn't allow them to go to such a place. Gray, however, pointed out that was all the more reason why going alone was even more dangerous. If he utilized the same power he had used to take down the ogre general, then he should be able to offer her some real help. He added that if Professor Ariel were to disappear, he, as a Divine Eye admission student, would definitely get expelled. That statement made her visibly flinch. He then requested they be allowed to decide their own fate. The professor just watched them quietly, then let out a weary sigh. She could tell they would still come along, even if she tried to stop them now. So she agreed to let them come, but only on one condition, that no matter what happened, their safety was always the absolute top priority. She then confirmed if they understood. They confirmed with a yes. Later that night, high in the mountains, a hidden laboratory stood secret, and Professor Ariel, too. Bella and Gray stood hidden before its entrance. Bella couldn't believe that Varian was truly conducting illegal experiments here. Professor Ariel confirmed her suspicions, and their plan was to hunt for evidence. Gray also verified that this was indeed the spot, given their assurance that Bella trusted them. But a wave of hesitation washed over her, wondering if they could truly gather the evidence without encountering any trouble at all. Professor Ariel expected Varian would be attending the Magic Society's conference, meaning he wouldn't be present. It was highly probable that the main entrance was riddled with deadly traps, so they'd have to blast through a sidewall. Bella wondered if that was truly acceptable. Professor Ariel calmly replied that breaking into an academy's authorized lab was already a significant crime regardless, so it hardly mattered. She then told them to feel free to turn back if they changed their minds, but she was absolutely determined to proceed. Before they moved, however, she asked Professor Ariel if she was truly certain, because she was doing all this for someone like Bella. Gray quickly corrected her, stating she was mistaken, because halting this experiment was actually for the entire world's sake. If they failed, countless innocent people would perish. What's more, the world itself would be sacrificed. Bella looked to him, asking what he meant. Professor Ariel conceded that what Gray said might be an exaggeration, but she absolutely agreed he must be stopped. She then reassured Bella not to worry excessively. She made it clear that they weren't putting their lives on the line just because of her. Then they moved out. Our waifu professor immediately began summoning a flurry of magic circles. She blasted the laboratory, causing the wall to spectacularly collapse. The resulting explosion was absolutely colossal, and Gray couldn't help but think it was completely over the top, with a hole now torn in the wall. They stepped inside, and Gray's eyes widened at the sight. It was a dark alleyway with cells lining its sides, and within, people reduced to mere skin and bones, chained to the walls. Some bled from lost limbs or grievously punctured bodies. Just from this sight alone, Professor Ariel instantly realized that there was no need for them to even bother looking for any further evidence. With so many people here, just one glance was enough for Professor Ariel to identify no fewer than 14 forbidden spells, each a severe criminal offense in itself. And there was no need to even mention the unauthorized human experimentation, an equally heinous and serious offense. As they surveyed the grim scene, something else caught their attention. It was what looked like some sort of an altar. Bella nervously asked what they should do. Their original plan was simply to leave with evidence, but now she had to ask, should they also attempt to rescue these trapped people? Gray replied they shouldn't linger here much longer, because Varian might return at any moment. But to their utter shock, a voice from behind asked, "Did you just call for me?" Professor Ariel, startled, asked about his conference. It was Varian. Everyone was astonished he was here. He replied he'd arranged for a double to attend instead, to handle things in his place, because he had a truly important experiment to conduct here. Professor Ariel pressed him. What important experiment? He replied he'd just acquired some fresh materials and wanted to utilize them while they were still fresh. He was referring to the lifeless bodies lined up, hanging eerily in one of the cells. But now his plans had changed. Hearing this sent a collective shiver down their spines. He now desired materials with far more magical potential than the average person. Regardless, he had no idea how they'd caught wind of his experiments, but he was certain they hadn't told anyone that they were coming here today. So if they all suddenly went missing, no one would suspect him. Professor Ariel realized then he was saying he intended to use them as lab rats. Varian chillingly told her to relax. Her sacrifice would push the very boundaries of magic itself, since he can't let them escape alive. He'll make sure to use them to his full advantage. He was completely caught off guard when a massive fireball nearly struck him. It unleashed a massive explosion. Even Professor Ariel hadn't seen that coming. It was Bella who launched the attack. As the smoke cleared, they saw Varian. Amused and unscathed, he remarked that Professor Ariel still hasn't lost her edge. He never expected that a special admission student like Bella would possess such exceptional talent. It made him consider looking into the other divine recruits as well. However, he wasn't exactly impressed with Bella's little stunt. An academy student attempting to assassinate a professor? That simply makes no sense. Bella shot back. It's better to kill than be killed. Though, she missed her chance this time. Professor Ariel instructed them. We're pulling back. We already have the evidence, so the academy can handle the rest. But of course, Varian wouldn't just let them get away. He unleashed a dark orb of black flame right at them. It nearly struck Bella. Fortunately, Professor Ariel blocked it. But Bella immediately worried for her. Varian told her, it's pointless, since it's one of the fruits of my research. The gluttony flame. It conjures a flame that devours defensive magic and turns it into fuel. So in theory, it can't be blocked. The downside is that it costs a little rare material to conjure. It had already shattered Professor Ariel's magic barrier. She groaned as she activated her eye and instantly erected an added layer of barrier. It was up just as the first one shattered, but it immediately cracked. As soon as the gluttony flame made contact, she instructed Bella, take the spell. Memory pouch to Gray. She added, if Heathcote sees it, he'll know exactly what to do. Bella tapped the ground with her staff and instantly created a wider barrier. She was utterly confused by what she was doing and urgently told her to leave. But Bella noticed the professor's barrier starting to crack, so she insisted on handling it herself. Professor Ariel reminded them of their promise made before arriving, which stated that if anything went wrong, their lives were the absolute priority. She sensed Varian's magic was inherently unnatural, making standard defense spells useless against it. She declared she'd buy them some precious time, but her words were cut short as her barrier spectacularly shattered. Panic seized her, but Bella calmly assured her it was fine. Bella's magic then fiercely clashed with the gluttony flame. She shielded them effectively, confidently declaring his spell wasn't as potent as it seemed. It simply required a slightly different kind of defense magic. Varian stared in utter disbelief, especially since only they knew the counter magic for gluttony flames. He furiously demanded to know how she possessed that knowledge. She simply replied that someone taught her a new theory. With that, the spell became remarkably easy. He was beyond furious, completely beside himself. He demanded to know who it was, convinced it had to be a traitor. He vowed that if she revealed her source, he'd grant her a swift, clean death. She playfully asked if he really wanted to know who taught her. She smiled coyly and simply replied, "It's a secret." She hinted that the teacher was a student from the swordsmanship course. Gray recalled their past interactions and realized that in reality, he was the one who pieced the theory together. Varian's veins practically popped out when he realized she wasn't taking him seriously. He then pulled out an ominous red crystal and declared they would all be burned alive. He crushed the crystal in his hand, releasing tormented souls. They swarmed, hurtling directly towards them. It was potent dark magic, engulfing them entirely. Gray worried, wondering if Bella was still alright. She replied that the barrier could still hold strong. But Varian knew her mana reserves wouldn't sustain it. With her current reserves, he estimated she had a minute at absolute best. Bella urgently requested Professor Ariel to attack Varian, as she was completely tied up with defense. The professor immediately heeded her call. Professor Ariel's eye began to glow intensely, revealing a weak spot where the flame was thinned out. She projected mana beyond the barrier's edge. She tested it cautiously, slowly building up her power. Then, with a surge, she unleashed her lightning magic. It shot out like blades, but eventually it flickered and died. Varian noticed their futile attempts to counterattack, but he scoffed, telling them they're puny. Attacks couldn't even reach him. Professor Ariel found herself in a dire pinch. Gray recalled that her offensive magic was famously one of the weakest among the staff, and with the flame's unique properties, it must have simply absorbed her spells. Bella frantically asked what they should do. She was almost completely depleted. Professor Ariel then pointed out that it was precisely why she'd urged them to flee earlier. Gray stepped forward, telling them to leave this to him. Bella questioned what in the world he was planning. Obviously, his sword couldn't possibly reach Varian, but from here he was certain it would. Professor Ariel asked if he was truly sure about this. If he unleashed that power once more, it could kill him, and even if he lived, his dominant arm might never fully recover. He replied grimly that dying alone was better than all three of them perishing. He assumed a decisive combat stance. Varian noticed a crimson light emanating from them, despite them being engulfed in black flames. Then he watched Gray launch himself forward. The very next thing Varian knew, his head was sent flying and blood splattered everywhere. Gray watched him with a grave, unyielding expression. A chilling stillness followed in the wake of his attack. Bella was utterly dumbfounded. Varian's headless body toppled, and his severed head rolled. Professor Ariel was left utterly shocked, as it was her first time witnessing the real thing. With her own eyes, it was utterly astonishing. Bella then noticed debris beginning to rain down on them. The very ceiling itself started to crumble apart. Professor Ariel used her magic to hold the debris still, preventing it from crashing down upon them. She expressed that what had just happened was far beyond her wildest expectations. She asked if he was all right. Gray dropped his sword, his hands visibly trembling. As he answered, his dominant hand hurt quite a bit and was also numb, yet he could still move it. He carefully picked up his sword with his other hand. From that brutal display, she could tell his training was really paying off. He readily agreed with her. He knew that if he had used that power back then, back in the village days, he'd have been unconscious for days, waking up, completely unable to move his arms. But now, it only left him with a sore arm. That was quite the improvement. He realized his training was truly worth every bit of effort, while he was lost deep in thought. Professor Ariel watched him with intense focus. She expressed her gratitude, saying it was thanks to him that they were all still alive. She also apologized for him having to use such immense power. He quickly told her not to worry about it. Besides, he was the one who insisted. They had to stop Varian from the very beginning. Still, she thanked him once more. But she also requested that if at all possible, He refrained from using that power for a while. Otherwise, the damage could become irreversible. She truly looked incredibly worried. That admission caught him completely off guard. He pondered her words for a moment, and simply replied that he understood. Then, Bella called out, grabbing his attention. She asked if what she saw was magic. Since she hadn't sensed any ether at all, she was utterly baffled as trying to explain such immense power as mere magic was simply impossible. Professor Ariel then politely told her not to probe any further into that matter, and she wasn't allowed to mention a single word about what she saw either. Bella asked why, but the professor replied that she couldn't promise, and that she would be forced to erase her memories. Bella immediately replied that she understood and offered a magic contract to seal it. Professor Ariel readily agreed to that. They signed a contract soon after. Gray then asked what they should do next. He was concerned about the ongoing experiments, but he wanted to help those people first. He checked on them, and they looked like they'd simply been put to sleep with magic. Professor Ariel responded that, even if those people weren't in immediate danger, it would be best to take them to the academies to ensure the medical facilities remained safe. She snapped her fingers. The entire area shimmered with golden light, and each person was then enveloped in the golden glow. It was a shield against any external harm. Once that was done, she urged them to investigate further. Gazing at the place once more, she understood the sheer madness of it all. Unlawful experiments were taking place. Everywhere her eyes landed, nearly all involved the gruesome act of human sacrifice to craft magical catalysts or enhance human magical abilities. She couldn't find any experiments that involved the liquidator. This led her to conclude that it was being held in a different facility. Gray found it utterly bizarre. This was the very place where the incident occurred that killed tens of thousands of people. Before his regression, he pondered how merely producing a magical catalyst could possibly cause such a disaster. Suddenly, he remembered what had killed those people back in his previous world. It was a deadly miasma that welled up from the ground. Professor Ariel caught sight of his troubled expression, so she asked what was bothering him. Bella, too, checked on his well-being. He suspected something much deeper lay beneath this very spot. He proposed the existence of hidden passages leading underground. Professor Ariel scanned her surroundings. Bloodstains and dirt marred the floor, but no hidden passages could be found. Until her special eye caught something. She approached it. She crouched, meticulously inspecting the ground. The trace was faint, but she could sense traces of short distance. Teleportation magic in that spot. She deduced it was a space only accessible with teleportation magic. Based on the residual magic, the teleportation distance was roughly 300 meters. She knew something was hidden there. Gray then inquired if reaching it was possible. She revealed she herself could use short distance, a teleportation gate as well. She gave it a try, and a magic circle appeared on the ground. If there's nothing, the other end of the gate should lead to nothing but solid earth. Then the gate opened. They were all utterly surprised by what they saw. It was a vast area, absolutely packed with buildings, almost like an entire city. No one would ever think there'd be such a massive space hidden underneath that facility. Bella could sense a tremendous output of ether gushing out from all over the place, especially from the very building she pointed toward. It was a deceptively simple circular structure. Professor Ariel noticed it wasn't just ether, but a completely different kind of power as well. Something completely alien to magic leaking out there, and it was far, far greater than anything she'd ever witnessed. Gray had an inkling, a terrifying suspicion of what that power was. Professor Ariel then confirmed it. It was the liquidator's power. Professor Ariel, Gray, and Bella then entered the building. They found an empty hallway leading to a single door. She then confirmed the power was emanating from within. Yet, there was no sign of the liquidator himself. At that moment, she knocked on the door. Then she opened it, which made Bella worried. She thought they were messing with a sealed gate. But Professor Ariel simply told her to relax, because the door itself held no power. It was just placed there as a symbol for a ritual. The true power wasn't in the door. It It was in a magic rigs surrounding it. Suddenly, the magic rigs began to glow. Professor Ariel stood right at its center. Gray asked what was happening, thinking she was trying to summon the liquidator or something. Bella could tell this magic was incredibly dangerous, so she urged them to shut it down at once. But Professor Ariel calmly told them not to rush. Her prediction told her that this setup couldn't actually summon the liquidator. Then the door cracked open and a void of pure darkness began to emerge. It was on the other side. Gray worried that the very fabric of space was being torn. Bella urgently called out to the professor. Then the magic slowly died down. The two looked confused, but it was exactly as Professor Ariel had expected. She had confirmed something vital, that these devices weren't meant to summon the liquidator. They just punched a tiny gap right where it existed, then funneled the leaking power through it. The very core they used to crystallize that power was most likely human lives themselves. She could tell at least 10 souls have been used so far, but the molding process may have demanded even more sacrifices. She guessed that the majority of the people they'd seen upstairs were taken as mere raw materials. Bella then inquired why they'd go to such extremes, just to gather more power. She wondered what they were trying to achieve with it. The black flame variant used in their recent fight was most likely boosted by that very crystal, and that crystal was merely the byproduct after processing the captured power. She also knew that this catalyst wouldn't be limited to mere flames. If they could mass-produce this material, no one knew exactly what they planned to do with it. The cracks on the door were rapidly disappearing. Gray asked if Varian wasn't trying to summon the liquidator, after all. But Professor Ariel had no idea if he hadn't tried, or if he just couldn't. She then inspected the magic rigs and determined they were pushed to their absolute limits. It could be that this setup was all they could manage. Bella looked around and deemed the apparatus to be extremely valuable. She had never seen spatial warp magic that was so precise and high output. Professor Ariel agreed, revealing that making just one would cost a nation's entire budget, but to possess 8 of them, only a single organization came to her mind. Bella guessed it was the Discar Empire, but it wasn't them. They might be the world's largest country, but they probably lacked the magical resources needed to build even one. Bella inquired who else it could be. Professor Ariel thought of one organization whose magical research dwarfed even the empires. Gray then figured it must be the World Union Academy. Bella looked slightly confused. Professor Ariel told him he was absolutely right. No other research body could possibly handle a project of that scale and budget. A heavy silence fell between them until Bella finally broke it to confirm if the Academy was truly behind all this. She could barely believe it, as the World Union Academy was sworn to protect the world from threats. Professor Ariel understood why. She was reluctant to believe it, but she couldn't pinpoint any other group capable of pulling something like that off. Gray argued that this didn't mean the entire Academy was their enemy. He firmly believed that most within its ranks would be on their side, because before his regression, the Academy's top forces were the very ones on the front lines, even beyond the subjugation squads. They bravely protected civilians right until the very end. After witnessing that future, he couldn't possibly believe the Academy was humanity's foe. Professor Ariel pointed out that it was exactly as. He said, most of the Academy probably acts for humanity and wouldn't permit experiments that needlessly waste lives. However, the Academy boasts countless researchers, as well as facilities, and hardly anyone in the world truly knows the whole picture. And she could tell that whoever was backing Varian had some seriously deep pockets. He couldn't have arranged all of that with his authority alone. Bella realized they couldn't fully trust the Academy either. Professor Ariel, who'd watched the Academy from the inside for decades, had one thing to say. It's not an organization they can blindly trust. Most of the people inside thought they were actually doing what was best for humanity. Even those behind the horrific experiments had probably convinced themselves that it was for the greater good. She could only conclude that the truth was buried deep in the dark. Gray probed her for any idea on how they might find the mastermind. She looked around, but found no communication devices anywhere in the facility. Not even the maker's magic residue remained on the rigs. The cover-up was so thorough that finding any evidence would be incredibly difficult. Then, suddenly she sensed something. A massive explosion erupted right behind Bella. The roof caved in, and chaos instantly erupted. She quickly inspected the scene and realized they'd even installed evidence, erasing mechanisms, but they didn't blow up the place. The moment Varian died, which led her to assume they were planning to lure in anyone snooping around before detonating the entire facility. Bella screamed that this was no time for hypotheses. They needed to get out of there fast. Professor Ariel told her to calm down, because these were just magical explosives. She confidently declared that the World Union Academy's professors weren't so weak they'd be killed by something like this. Professor Ariel swiftly created a magic circle, telling them not to step out of it. The magic rigs around them also began to glow. This had truly been a close call. Luckily, they vanished just before everything completely fell apart. They teleported outside the laboratory, along with several other people. Everyone who had been captured made it out safely. Bella truly thought she was going to die. Gray then commented that they were still too close to the lab to feel safe. Professor Ariel responded that they had more baggage than she expected, so it slowed the teleportation down. But it was entirely worth it, because they were also able to secure the magic rigs. Once they show these to the Academy won't be able to ignore them any longer. The night deepened. The next day, they were informed that the survivors were being treated in the Academy's medical wing. The one who brought them the news was the World Union Academy headmaster, Ordrum Alexandro. He expressed his profound gratitude for stopping Varian's illegal experiments. Then he brought up the topic of the magic rigs. Each one of them was worth more than a national budget. Professor Ariel knew that, and there were 8 of them. She was certain there was no way he could have gathered that kind of firepower alone. She wondered how he'd gotten his hands on those. He replied they were stolen goods. They'd been hijacked mid-transport, and 78 transport agents were wiped out. And that was truly shocking news. Hearing that, 78 Academy transport agents were dead. She recalled an incident from 15 years ago. Alexandro confirmed that the cargo stolen back then had also carried those magic rigs. Professor Ariel remembered who was responsible. He revealed it was the Blood Drinker. He assumed she knew him. Gray was quite familiar with them. The world's biggest crime organization. Bella described them as parasites of the world, always crawling back, no matter how many times they're crushed. Her intense description made Gray glance at her, but it made perfect sense when she revealed they had killed her parents. Alejandro affirmed her description, because despite being exterminated hundreds of times, they still always resurfaced. No one knows where they hide or who truly leads them. Some say over 10% of all crime-related deaths were their doing. It wouldn't surprise Alexandro if some of their people were already lurking inside the Academy. What's worse, there's no way to tell them apart. Even if there were, the Academy wouldn't act on it. That made Gray raise his tone, asking what he meant. Professor Ariel replied that that's just how the Academy operates now. Anyone with talent gets a chance to grow stronger, no matter their bloodline, race, or gender. Alexandro confirmed that and added that it also doesn't matter if they're criminals. Bella yelled that it was absolutely absurd. She argued that if there were criminals, they should be dealt with immediately. Alejandro agreed. However, the higher-ups don't seem to share that view. She was utterly confused, because he was supposed to be the headmaster. He replied that he's nothing more than an underling. He clarified he's the face of the Academy on paper, but the authority he actually held was laughable. He then asked them if they truly wanted to know who was running things. Gray and Bella exchanged a nod. Alexandro then replied they needed to grow stronger, because the more power they could demonstrate, the deeper they'd be allowed into the Academy, and the more secrets they'd uncover. He couldn't name any names, but he told them about an upperclassman who wielded enough influence to shape the Academy's entire direction. Even that insane policy of admitting criminals was his decision. Gray wanted to verify his suspicions, and Alexandro replied that they, too, could even change the academy, because their strength meant everything. This declaration fueled their determination. It was evident as they clenched their fists, their hands trembling. Alexandro found it amusing, because he knew Ariel had no chance against Varian at all. This meant one of their students was responsible. He couldn't deny that. Ariel's divine eye was as sharp as ever. He couldn't wait to see what kind of monster she'd train next. After that, Gray walked the hallway alone. He checked the mark on his arm, pondering how power truly ruled the academy, whether they wanted to take down the liquidator or uncover what was going on behind the scenes. They need to focus on getting stronger first. When he looked up, he saw someone. So he excused himself, but to his surprise, the guy instantly kicked him. He blocked it with his forearms, but he was still pushed back. His feet dragged across the floor until he found his balance. The person who kicked him commented that Gray was tougher than expected. Gray demanded to know his problem. The guy was offended by the question, because it was Gray, who was walking around like he owned the place. The guy claimed a special admission reject, like him didn't belong in the hallway. Gray realized he was one of those who hated the special slots. But this was the first time someone actually kicked him. In the hallway, Gray had to confirm if he was picking a fight. He was about to, but then reject number 2 showed up. Gray turned, curious who he was talking about. And just like that, the guy was gone. As he walked away, he spoke to someone, offering his apologies. He explained that surveillance was tight, preventing him from getting any closer. He then promised to send someone else. This guy, it turns out, was talking to Varian. And just as we suspected, that old traitor is still alive. Professor Ariel asked Gray what exactly happened. He replied that some random student had kicked him, ranting that a divine, I special admit like him, shouldn't even be allowed in the academy's halls, because there were no weapons or injuries involved. Professor Ariel couldn't officially do anything about it. So she suggested he chase him down and punch the lights out of him. Gray was shocked to learn he was allowed to do that. As his professor, she couldn't technically permit it, but she reasoned her eyesight's been getting pretty bad lately. So, if something were to happen nearby, she might not notice it. She even acted the part to look more convincing. Gray finds that way too suspicious, so he decides to just leave the guy alone. He didn't want to cause any more trouble. She thought it was such a shame, but was curious if Divine Eye special admits were disliked that much. He told her some people made fun of them sometimes, but it was the first time it had gotten physical. She realized her students were being openly mocked. She apologized to him. She felt bad about not having more authority at school. He assured her there was nothing to worry about. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't even be in the academy. And he was certain Bella and the others would prove that the Divine Eye program wasn't a mistake after all. You have good eyes. That left her speechless. It made her blush, and then she thanked him. Bro's riz is getting effective. Then she told him he couldn't just pawn it off as someone else's problem, because out of everyone in the Divine Eye group, he was the one she expected the most from. She believed that Amy White, Leek Muller, Jacob Bloomfield, like the special admits before them, would all reach the very top tier. But the first time she truly believed someone could transcend humanity itself was when she met him. He was bothered by her comparing him to them, but he quickly realized that was a weak mindset. The mastermind behind Varian probably hadn't given up on summoning the liquidator yet, and even those incredible individuals couldn't even leave a scratch on that thing. He came back to that timeline to ensure he could utterly defeat it. He remembered what he'd been told. The fate of the world rests in his hands. After that encounter, the swordsmanship class held a live combat practice. The students paired up, according to the list on the board. Gray had to be razor sharp for this practical training, because if he screwed up, everyone would start bad-mouthing. All the Divine Eye admits again. At the very least, he needed to show he could keep up with the regular students. But he was paired with Leonard Appius. He's the absolute top of the swordsmanship course. In other words, he's the strongest first-year student. The professor informed them that he'd matched students of similar skill levels, so they wouldn't have to hold back. and to treat it like a real fight. But Gray thought it was a complete joke. He wondered how he'd end up fighting the top student when he barely scraped by as a special admit. On top of that, the guy already hates Divine Eye students. He expected him to be itching to beat him bloody. After the incident last year, someone then caught our MC's attention. Leonard approached him and expressed that he was glad to be paired with him. Deep inside, since he got a spar with Gray, he felt becoming top of the class was absolutely worth it. Leon genuinely believed he trained harder than anyone. He was desperate to showcase his swordsmanship to Gray. Gray's mouth twisted in a grimace when he saw him. Leon Hart's smile was just a little too bright. It made Gray certain Leon Hart was absolutely loving the fact that he finally had a legitimate chance to beat him up. He even stuttered when he replied that he was looking forward to it. I mean, just look at that facial expression, dude. A few moments later, the professor asked if everyone was ready. The match began, and Leon Hart attacked at once. Gray blocked him with his sword barely. He struggled, though. He was pushed back hard when Leon Hart swung his sword. Leon Hart was absolutely laser-focused. He attacked again, and Gray barely managed to evade it. Then, Gray gripped his sword tightly and fiercely counterattacked. Leon Hart blocked his sword, while acknowledging that Gray was incredibly strong. It was hard to believe he didn't make it through. Regular admission, they continuously clashed swords. Gray expected to get instantly wrecked, but he was actually holding his own. But still, he couldn't match Leon Hart's raw power, even with both arms. Leon Hart's swordsmanship was absolutely insane. It was a proper, by-the-book style. He described it as polite swordsmanship, but perfected to an utterly terrifying degree, even with all the experience from his past life and his master's intense training. He could only call Leon Hart a monster, especially for someone in his first life. Their incredible fight captured the attention of all the other students. They were clearly impressed by how Gray was actually keeping up with Leon Hart. Leon Hart felt absolutely wonderful. He even expressed how he could do this all day. But Gray was worried, as his stamina simply couldn't keep up. If it weren't for Heathcote's rigorous training, he'd already be completely down. What he didn't know was that Leon Hart was bothered, that Gray still wasn't out of breath. It wasn't obvious at all that Gray was running out of stamina. Deep inside, Gray felt an urgent rush to end it at once. He remembered the professor explicitly saying to fight like it's a real one. He focused intently, watching his opponent's every move. He quickly ducked as a sword swung menacingly at him, still grounded from his dodge. He swiftly pivoted his body, using his hand for leverage. Leon Hart was completely caught off guard when Gray suddenly lunged for his ankle. Leon Hart was taken aback by Gray's surprising maneuver, especially when he saw Gray's intense expression. He realized Gray was treating this like a genuine life-or-death battle, and he gripped his sword tighter. He had to give his all. Losing simply wasn't an option. After several intense clashes, eventually, the two combatants ended up with swords pressed to each other's throats. Gray declared the bout a draw. He offered a hand up, and Leon Hart accepted it, but quickly countered that it wasn't quite a draw. He admitted that in their final exchange, all he could manage was a desperate swing of his sword. On the other hand, Gray could have easily pierced straight through his heart if he had truly wanted to. Since it was a mock battle, he knew Gray was merely forced to hold the sword at his neck. Gray then commented that, even with all the protective spells surrounding them, aiming a sword at someone's heart in a mock duel felt pretty messed up. Leon Hart finally concluded he had lost. He genuinely thanked Gray for making him see the stark difference between real combat and mere fencing practice. He also learned that fighting wasn't just about sword skills alone. Gray, ever humble, replied that his tactic was merely a cheat move for a swordsmanship class. Leon Hart quickly reminded him that the instructor had said to treat this like real combat, meaning there's no such thing as cheating in a real fight. Therefore, he had a suggestion. How about another round? Gray didn't seem too fond of the idea. He insisted he only won because he'd caught Leon Hart off guard. If they were to go at it head-on, he knew there was no way he'd stand a chance. It wasn't about technique anymore. He was well aware that Leon Hart's stamina would leave him in the dust. But then, someone stopped them. The man pointed out that they were in a sword class, and nobody said He's allowed to use anything except a sword. He also questioned how a special admit loser like him got paired up with a top student. He warned him not to get too cocky, just because he has some magic. It wasn't like Gray was the one who arranged the matchup. Leon Hart quickly stepped in and replied that the instructor had decided that he's the only one worthy of fighting Gray. He told the guy to butt out. The instructor then confirmed what Leon Hart said. He reminded them that he paired students with similar overall strength, and Gray was the only one who could take Leon Hart on. Leon Hart nodded his head in agreement. The instructor then proposed to the other student to try facing Gray if he's still not satisfied. If he could beat Gray, then he would be Leon Hart's opponent. He agreed then. He told Gray that he was able to beat the examiner to enter the academy. He didn't want to be lumped in with those who barely scraped a pass in a tie, or the ones who couldn't pass at all. Leon Hart realized this guy was judging Gray by his admission category, without even knowing his true strength. He saw his old self in him, but he also thought it would be a good chance to make them recognize Gray's power. More than that, he's annoyed that this guy interrupted his time with Gray. The guy noticed his expression. Leon Hart wanted to judge him with death for that crime. The poor guy was puzzled as to why he's so pissed. Since the guy didn't like the real combat rule, he agreed that they could only use their swords. He asked Gray if he's okay with that. Gray had no clue how strong the guy was, but if he got into the academy through regular exams, he knew it wouldn't be that easy. He could tell he had more stamina and strength in him, even with his master's brutal training. He couldn't beat years of proper nourishment and conditioning. He expressed that he's not confident in his skills, but it wasn't like he'd get expelled if he lost. The instructor confirmed that he's right. It was just a practice class. Still, he urged them not to hold back. Hearing that, Gray readily agreed. The moment the signal to begin was given, the guy immediately charged at him. This guy was thrilled to finally put Gray in his place. Gray blocked the sword, getting slightly confused. He shifted his sword and easily pushed the guy away. The guy was absolutely stunned. Gray felt his opponent's hits were far too light, and his powers were nothing special at all. Of course, this guy foolishly attacked again. Gray wondered if his opponent was holding back. He simply swung his sword, and to everyone's surprise, the guy was struck and immediately started bleeding. He crumpled to the opposite side of the ring. The instructor then swiftly announced the match was over. Gray got nervous, quickly asking if he was okay. He was only aiming for his opponent's sword, but he had accidentally hit the guy instead. He was fully expecting him to dodge. But this guy stubbornly claimed it was just a fluke, insisting he was simply caught off guard. His face was a mess, with tears freely flowing, and blood streaking down his nose and cheeks. But since his ego was clearly bigger than his brain, he foolishly challenged our MC to another round. The other students couldn't help but pity him, since it looked incredibly painful already. The instructor could only let out a resigned sigh. He then reluctantly agreed to let them continue until they were both satisfied. And so, he charged again. As time passed, Gray still looked completely fine. He asked the guy if he was somehow okay. The guy could barely even open his eyes. His face was already completely unrecognizable from all the brutal bruises and bumps. His speech was severely slurred when he insisted he was fine. He somehow still managed to assume a combat stance, despite his utterly terrible condition. The instructor finally had to intervene and tell him to stop. He immediately told one of the other students to quickly take him to the infirmary. After that, he officially announced that the year's representatives would be Gray and Leon Hart. He asked if there were any objections from the class. Gray, however, had no idea what representatives even were. The instructor then clarified that the top first years would take on the formidable second-year champion in the annual inter-year battle. The first years had suffered 35 consecutive losses, but with Gray now among them, he had a strong feeling that this year, things would finally be different. Gray was genuinely surprised to hear that. There had been 35 such devastating losses. He then asked if the power gap between first years and second years was really that immense. The instructor simply replied, yes. A single year at the academy makes a huge difference. He told them that losing was completely normal. If anything, it was practically expected. So, If they could even put up a decent fight, that would already be incredibly impressive. And if someone actually wins, that would be etched into the Academy's history as an absolute miracle. Just being chosen to fight would be considered a tremendous honor. The instructor tapped his shoulder and told him not to stress about it too much. With that, he dismissed the class. Before taking his leave, Gray realized that this inter-year battle wasn't quite as serious as he initially thought. Still, as a Divine Eye Special student, this was a golden opportunity to prove he could truly fight. He knew that he needed to train hard. Meanwhile, the Academy faculty convened for a meeting, with Professor Budra's proposal being the final item. Professor Ariel watched him intently. Professor Budra of the Magic Department proposed that Amy White be expelled. Professor Ariel immediately questioned his reasoning for such a suggestion, especially considering that she's the one currently managing the Divine Eye students. Professor Budra pointed out that that was precisely the problem. Amy White had failed the third year's advancement exam. In spite of that failure, she was allowed to remain because she's a special admit. Every other student who failed, however, was expelled. Thus, he argued that it simply doesn't appear fair to anyone. Headmaster Alexandro remained silent. Professor Ariel countered, reminding him that, as she had previously stated, Amy was steadily progressing toward top class, world-level combat ability. However, since the backlash on her body was quite harsh at the moment, she couldn't display her full power. If that wasn't the case, she would have easily passed. The other professors were clearly displeased with that excuse. Once again, the professor, next to Budra, stated the reason why. The backlash on her body was so severe, makes a useless student sound like some hidden prodigy. He then questioned how long she keeps spouting that fantasy of her secret powers. Professor Ariel insisted it was the truth, believing Amy could gain control any day now. But if they pushed her too soon, maybe even tomorrow, she might lose that chance forever. They insisted. She'd given them the same excuse before. The professor saw it as her permitting someone unable to meet Academy standards to stay there indefinitely. She argued the Academy exists to nurture exceptional talents. Kicking out someone gifted just because they don't fit neatly into a system defeats its whole purpose. Professor Budra doubted that talent. He stated that special admissions were impressive in the old days, but the current batch was full of failures. His examples, Amy Whitell, Bella Albright, and Jacob Bloomfield. To him, the great divine, I was losing its keenness. The professor next to her suggested abolishing the Divine Eye program entirely. Professor Ariel was slightly caught off guard. She asked them what they were talking about. Professor Budra told her it was established ages ago by the Academy's Founders Council, so it could be abolished the same way. If over half of the faculty agreed to the idea, some professors expressed that the current Divine Eye students simply don't impress. They saw Bella Albright improve, but it was no major achievement. Not to mention, her mana capacity was questionable. Professor Ariel didn't know how to respond. An older professor also expressed that, even though the old Divine Eye students were impressive, the recent batch wasn't. The others agreed that they didn't have the impact they used to have. She scanned the room and saw those professors smirking, while others seemed to be swaying their opinions. More anti-Divine Eye sentiment rose than she'd anticipated. At this rate, the program could genuinely face closure. Professor Budra emphatically argued that it had been outdated for far too long, and it was time for everyone to move on. He then challenged Professor Ariel, asking if she still planned to judge talent better than all the rest of them. She remained utterly silent, so he took it that the cat had gotten her tongue, and declared that she at least knew she'd passed her prime. The professor beside him then suggested to Professor Ariel to retire before she completely ruined her legacy. And the others flatly told her that if she wanted to nurture her favorite students, however she liked, she should just start her own school. Another professor sneered, adding that it would take incredible luck for her to find students who'd actually follow the washed-up Divine Eye. Then they all laughed loudly. Professor Ariel remained silent. She was confident she could still recognize true talent, but those kids just needed more time. Given time, they would absolutely prove themselves. She just needed to stop them from getting expelled. Before that could happen, she tried to think of anything to say when someone brought up one of the Divine Eye students. A boy named Gray, the professor who mentioned him, had heard that he was quite promising among the first-year swordsmanship students. The long-haired professor then shared that Gray had been picked for the inter-year battle. Professor Budra agreed that it sounded promising. He suggested letting him prove it in the competition. Then they could decide the Divine Eye program's future after seeing the results. Professor Ariel glanced quickly at Professor Heathcote. He saw her gaze and shook his head. Professor Ariel had to speak up. She told them that Gray's power wasn't suited for mere mock battles, but if it were a kill or be killed situation. She was cut off by Professor Budra, who was clearly sick of her excuses. The professor beside him chimed in, adding that if Gray couldn't show his power in training, he wouldn't be able to show it in real combat either. Professor Ariel argued that his abilities were far beyond normal swordsmanship. The crowd fell silent. Alexandro promptly dismissed the meeting, seeing that the discussion was going nowhere. However, he expressed that seeing the Divine Eye students in action sounded perfectly reasonable. He planned to watch their performance in the inter-year battle and decide after that. That was terrible news for Professor Ariel. With that conclusion, the meeting was officially adjourned. Professor Budra, meanwhile, looked forward to the competition. They all expected it to be quite a show. Before Professor Heathcote exited, he glanced at Professor Ariel, who was left sitting there, looking utterly sullen. She felt apologetic to her students for being too weak. She remembered Gray in action, so she knew his power didn't fit mock battles. She was also certain that he still needed more time, and she knew what she was hoping for was unreasonable. Still, she hoped that he could help them. For those kids, those raw gems with world-class potential, to protect their future, she couldn't help her tears. The day of the inter-year battle finally arrived. The host announced its grand beginning. He began introducing the competitors, starting with the first-year top student, Leonard Apias. Next was the second-year top student, Lewis Hartman, and the first-year challenger was Gray Lee. After him, the second-year challenger, Diable Redartle, was introduced. Gray immediately recognized him. It was the same guy who had jumped on him out of nowhere, in the hallway. He couldn't believe he was about to face him in battle. Now, everyone would witness what they were truly capable of. All the professors were watching intently. Professor Budra had a distinct smirk on his face. Leon Hart noticed that so many professors had come to observe the showdown. He asked Louis Noll, "Are the inter-year battles usually like this?" Louis Noll revealed that it was a first. Only 3 fencing professors bothered to show up last year. It also made him wonder why there were so many that day. Then Leon Hart had a sudden eureka moment. Well, get this. It was all because the professors were curious about Gray. He totally approved of their excellent taste. Luinal. He wondered if that was Leon Hart's true personality. Professor Budra confirmed his guess was correct. He announced they had come to witness the final battle of the Divine Special. That statement sent the students into an uproar. When Gray quickly asked what he meant, Professor Budra was surprised no one had told him. Everyone looked to Professor Ariel. Then she responded that the Divine Eye class was being abolished. That news completely shocked him. He asked Professor Ariel if it was true. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. She knew that if she told him the truth, he would push himself and might even use that power. But in his current state, it could kill him. She took a deep breath in. She replied that Budra was just trying to mess with his focus. She told him not to let it get to him and just fight. A silence fell, and Gray noticed her trembling hands. He kept quiet and simply accepted her response. Professor Budra told them to go and embarrass themselves. He was confident that once they lost pathetically, the other professors would finally realize that Ariel's Divine Eye wasn't as keen as it used to be. Gray declared he couldn't let that slide. Professor Budra certainly didn't expect that, and then Gray told him he doesn't care if he insults him, but he didn't want him. Talking down on Professor Ariel's judgment. Professor Ariel was surprised by his statement. Professor Budra was absolutely triggered and insulted him by asking him, what kind of talent? Did Professor Ariel's eyes pick up on him? He added that, unlike his professor, those who haven't gone senile were convinced that he would lose. Pathetically, Gray became determined to prove them all wrong. This only heightened Professor Boudra's anger, so much so that his fellow professor had to calm him down. The host then instructed the participants to split up and join their teammate. Professor Ariel appreciated Gray's trust, but she was deeply worried and curious about his next move. Had he been fighting the top student? His practical, raw swordsmanship might have given him a slim chance, but he'd been matched with a dreadful opponent, Diabol Radartel. Diabol had his brain surgically rewired to supercharge his reflexes to inhuman levels. He's practically a living weapon. He was the absolute worst matchup for Gray's ambush tactics. It worried her, since Gray might have been planning to use that ability. She called out to him, telling him not to worry about her and not to push himself too hard. Gray was taken aback. Then he just smiled and replied that he knew. The top student match was about to kick off, so the representatives were told to step forward. The arena was warded with powerful protective magic to prevent fatal wounds. Triggering their opponent's safeguard would count as victory. They were told to fight as if it were real combat. After the instructions, the top student match of the interior battles had begun. Leonhardt charged first. Luenel braced himself for the incoming attack. Their swords continuously clashed. Then Luenel moved quickly to attack more aggressively, but Leonhardt ducked to evade his sword. Then he placed his ground for support and kicked Luenel on the jaw, but it put a strain on him. He realized he couldn't afford to fight like Gray. Luenel was able to evade his foot. He acknowledged that Leonhardt was good. He was even stronger than he was in his first year. He picked up the pace and asked if he could keep up. When he attacked again, Leonhardt deflected it, but Leonhardt lost his balance. He was backed into the barrier, and he knew he was in a bad place. He saw the incoming sword about to stab him, but he couldn't do anything. The sword hit the wall a few inches from his neck. The host then declared that was enough. He then announced the winner of the top student match was Luenel. Leonard thanked him for the intense match. Luenel admitted it had been a good fight. Up next was the highly anticipated challenger match. The representatives were then called forward. Leonhardt wished Gray some good luck. Gray had talked a big game, so he knew he had to back it up. He'd fought more hopeless monsters than he could count before turning back time. So compared to that, he fully expected to have more chances of winning. This very fight, Dibble dragged his sword, creating a horrifying screech, while he chillingly told Professor Bradley, "Just wait a little longer, and I'll send Gray right to where you are." And that's to hell. Thank you all so much for watching. Please check out this next Giga Chad video, and I'll see you guys next time. Also, support the channel by joining the Summon Club membership. You can also support us by simply liking this video and just being awesome.